Future Fred here. It's Fred from the future. The script was started in May 2024, so if you take any issues with anything I say going forward, remember, most of it was written by past Fred, who no longer exists. God rest his soul. Anyways, let's get on with the video! So, the Paper Mario Thousand Year Door remake is out, and it is good. Go play it, seriously. If you played the original, if you haven't played the original, go play it, I mean it. There's fantastic quality of life upgrades, the visuals have a lot of polish, there's some neat bonus content, and it's just like a remake of a game that's already really great. Now, one thing that delighted those of us who had been following the remake since the announcement. The game also has a completely updated and redone OST. A Thousand Year Door remake with some of the musical inspiration behind Origami King? A game with a killer soundtrack? It sounded too good to be true. Anyways, this video is going to be a review / analysis / other things of the Thousand Year Door remake's entire soundtrack. Yep, every song. We're going to be taking a look. This will be similar to my video game music rankings I've done in the past, but it won't be a worst to best order kind of deal. And it probably won't be as heavily edited as well. This will be more of a cool, chill look at the updated soundtrack of one of my favorite games. So yeah, we're probably just going to go through from start to finish. I thought about doing it in sections based on the kind of music, such as overworld music, battle music, etc. But I think the best way to do this will just be to go through the game in chronological order, chapter by chapter. On top of the game's original OST getting entirely redone, there's also a slew of new original songs in this OST that I'm excited to get into. Some things to look for while we go through this. 1. A different musical style. While the original Thousand Year Door opted for a very electronic feel, the remake takes more after the modern games, which love using sweeping orchestras, electric guitars, and things like that. In some ways the electronica is missed, but in some it's definitely improved. We'll get more into that as it becomes relevant. 2. New sections. Almost every song is like an extended version, new bits added in to keep things fresh. These aren't just updated with new instrumentation and orchestration, we're getting entirely new bits to ogle over. 3. Thousand Year Door's main motif. Thousand Year Door's main recurring leitmotif sounds like this. Longer note, followed by a shorter note a perfect fifth above, followed by the same note played longer. The composers of the remake decided they wanted this motif to be in almost every song. We'll keep a running tab of how many we catch. And finally, there are a few songs in the game that people say contain references to songs from the modern Paper Mario games. I think most of these are wrong. When we come across some of these, I'm going to rate each reference on a 3 Shine Sprite scale. With all of that out of the way, I think we're ready to dive in. I'm Fred the Monty Mole, and this is my review of the Thousand Year Door remake's original soundtrack. We'll start with the title theme. Normally when you boot up Thousand Year Door, this little prologue plays. But for the first time you boot up in the remake, that actually doesn't happen until after you start a new game. So, title first. The title theme in the Thousand Year Door remake is honestly very similar to the original. The intro has the same orchestral instruments coming in, the only real difference being the use of live instruments. The only thing really different is that the remake's intro is missing the extended snare drum roll leading into the main section. Then the main bit starts, the 8-bit wave instruments coming in the exact same way. There's some minor differences throughout, but this piece is extremely faithful to its counterpart. In the B section, the remake has this nice ethereal theremin-like instrument come in to sort of play a counter melody on top of everything, which I think sounds rather nice, adds a new layer of character to things. Then the next section is organ focused in both versions. The next section after that gives us a few more new counter melodies, a violin coming in and playing our very first instance of the Thousand Year Door motif. Some of the songs in the remake are worse than the original, and some are good but don't necessarily replace the original. I think this is one of the songs that might as well just replace the original. The live instruments sound so much better. The fun new counter melodies keep things interesting through what used to be kind of a repetitive opening number, and it all comes together so nicely. A tier. I wasn't planning on making this a tier list video, but yeah, screw it, A tier. Once a new game is started, the game's intro begins. This is the birth of Thousand Year Door's main theme. That perfect fifth-based melody sounds so mysterious and hopeful. This one I think is a little bit of a mixed bag in the remake, if I'm being honest. I'm not that big a fan of the main instrument the remake uses, these bells. In the original, the main bells are really soft and comforting, almost lulling you into a sleepy state as the story is read out. But the live bells used in the remake are really punchy. They're a bit loud and intrusive, which kind of betrays the softness of the storybook opening. Besides that, the live instruments definitely outpace the synths used in the original GameCube version. I especially love the bassoon in this part, and the strings sound immaculate. Besides the instrumentation upgrade, this one's very similar to the original, just sounding like a souped-up version. Due to the slightly obnoxious bells, this one isn't an outright replacement of the original, but it still stands well on its own. B tier. So after the storybook intro, we move on to Peach just kinda doing some light shopping. This is where the remake diverges from the original, at least a little bit. Similar chord progressions at the beginning, but the rest of this little intro bit is very different from what it used to be. Other than that though, this is pretty similar. And honestly, plays for such a short amount of time that it's barely worth mentioning. Thousand Year Door's main motif is hidden in here, but this was also in the original, so it's not that interesting to point out. What is interesting is that there's actually more to the original version than there is to the remake. This is probably due to the fact that in the original, this was a cutscene in which the text progressed on its own, and in the remake, the player has to manually progress the text, meaning they needed something that can loop. But this is the rare instance of the original version being the extended edition. Worth pointing out. Anyways, B tier. I don't know why I'm doing Next is a new song for the remake. Or rather, an old song. It's just not in Thousand Year Door, but it is still a remix. This, of course, is Greetings from the Mushroom Kingdom, a song that plays for 2 seconds as Parakarry, a song from the first Paper Mario, delivers a letter to Mario's house. It also plays later for When You Talk to Bo. This is honestly such an awesome addition. As a big fan of the first Paper Mario, it was great to hear this thing in its entirety. The main melody is whistled in a way that sounds so quaint and homey, like the song is the equivalent of eating comfort food. This makes me want a Paper Mario 64 remake at some point. Man, that'd be cool. A tier. Also, first song so far with no Thousand Year Door motif. I guess that kinda makes sense. The next song that plays for the opening bit at the Mario Bros. House has a very grand intro, involving the main Mario theme. That immediately devolves into a slow, snappy, lethargic bop that we love to hear. This piece does a great job of capturing the lazy Sunday feel going on at the Mario Bros. House, a certain stasis occurring while the bros wait for something interesting to happen. The new version has a lot of new content. After the bit riffing on the Plains theme from Super Mario Bros. 3, where the original typically ends, we keep going. A jazzed up version of the C section from the Super Mario Bros. Main theme plays. Finally, right before the loop, we get just a hint of the little jingle that plays way at the end of the game right before the credits. The instrumentation is really nice in this one. A lot of live, jazzy instruments, some great snapping, and some really good 8-bit still electronica. B tier. Next is another new old song. A Letter from Peach is just another cover of Inside the Castle Walls from Super Mario 64. Inside the Castle Walls is such a weird name for Peach's castle theme. Like, it's so descriptive. It just makes me think of being trapped in the crawl space or something. It's good. It's a woodwind cover of a classic, but it doesn't really have a lot of Thousand Year Door's identity in it. This could be from literally any Mario game and you'd have no idea which one. C tier. Our first original song, the mystical map plays for like a 2-second zoom in of the mystical map for the first time. Just some descending arpeggiated chords reminiscent of the game's intro theme. Doesn't even need to be here, it's fine. D tier. Alright, we're back! The Adventure Begins sounds great with the full orchestra, perfectly encapsulating the moment Mario sets off on his journey. Kinda miss the 8-bit instrument that plays the melody in the original, but not that much. B tier. Okay, we are through the intro. All of that was only the introduction. Okay, no, we're fine. There's over 400 songs in the remake. Okay, no, this is fine. We're fine. Let's just jump into our first real song. Rogueport, the main hub of the game. Hey, the criminals are on the loose, the mafia fights the gangsters, there's a noose. Rogueport has one of the most iconic themes in the entire series, so this is a big one. And maybe this is the nostalgia talking, but in a lot of ways I do kinda prefer the original. Starting right off the bat with that first note, the original has this growing, soft square wave chord that just sounds so magical. This electronic instrument is replaced with a swelling string chord, which does sound nice, but I don't know, I feel a smidge of the original's identity is lost here. An instance of the orchestral replacing the electronic in a slightly disappointing way. I'd say my other big complaint about this new one is a small recurring problem I have with the new OST in general. Not every song needs to be a showstopper. I feel like the music design philosophy behind this game was to go big or go home. And every song goes big in a way that's really fun to listen to, but during actual gameplay, it just feels a little distracting. Like, this is the main hub, you guys can settle down a bit. Trumpet players, take a $5. I'm not the biggest fan of the trumpet that takes the main melody line, it's a bit piercing, and this part near the end is simply too bombastic. The horn wailing out over the melody in a way that just feels too celebratory for a small town theme. This version would have been awesome for like a post-game version, something that feels celebratory for when you're the hero of the town, but this plays right from the get-go and it's a little much. That's a lot of negativity, there's things I like about this one as well. During this mischievous section, I love the instrument they picked for this part of the song, that plays a sort of E diminished 7th chord. I'm pretty sure it's like a shanai, an Indian woodwind instrument, or maybe a mizmar. Either way, it sounds really good here, especially when it comes back to provide a nice counter melody down the line. And yep, right before the loop, here's our 1000-Year Door motif again. Follows us everywhere. So yeah, in the end, this version's really great, and listening to it separately, it's definitely more interesting and enjoyable than the original. But for actual background music, I actually think the original is better. It's a lot less distractive and fanfare-y. B tier. X-Nauts Attack, which plays when the X-Nauts attack. Pretty faithful to the original, at least for the first bit. It's spooky, fun, good for the hectic story beats that this song plays for. The lead instrument is a little more pronounced, and I like the choice of tremolo strings for this descending part, although the original spooky synth sounded nice too. Same thing with the following sections, instruments changed that aren't better but aren't worse, and is very faithful orchestration. But after this quick moving chaotic series of notes, the remake actually has a new section. And I don't know if I'd call it necessary, since the song only plays for short little events, but it still sounds nice. B tier. The event battle theme is pretty good. In the original, it functions as a recurring mini-boss theme, and while it's still recurring in the remake, it's used a lot less, probably because they wanted to write a couple of original songs. Also, I'm pretty sure they used the tutorial battle theme in the remake in a couple places they originally used the event battle theme, but I don't know, I could be wrong, I'm not a very bright mole. This one's a perfect example of the genre change between the original and the remake. While the original is stuffed full of weird synths and crazy sounds, the remake is very live string focused, with a nice funky bass in the lower register. Despite being nearly identical, the instrumentation really sets them apart. Oh, and the loop in the remake is longer. It doesn't have a new section per se, just the second loop of the song is done slightly differently, with a couple new flourishes and instrument choices. It's a fine redone song, but not particularly memorable. I say as if I haven't already been talking about it for way much longer than I should have. Way much longer. Learn English, not very bright mole. Oh, I forgot to write a tier in the script. I'm gonna pick a random one. B tier. One of the cooler additions to the Thousand Year Door remake are the inclusion of partner themes. Each partner in the game gets a unique piece of music that plays right before recruiting them into your band of adventurers / wrestlers / pirates / detectives. These songs are wholly original, but most include little snippets of other songs associated with the partner in question. Musically, these are one of the best additions to the game, I already said that. And each one of them is a banger, starting with Goombella's theme. This is also an interesting time to bring up another quirk of the Thousand Year Door remake's music. A lot of songs just have like a less interesting version. I'm pretty sure it's just the partner themes and the battle themes, but each one has like an idle version that plays if the player isn't really inputting anything for a while. While novel in concept, I'm not really a fan of this mechanic. Sometimes I just want to take in the music. Why should I be punished for putting down the controller and listening to the tunes by a boring version of the song? It's not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but as someone who really wanted to listen to the OST without the melody line occasionally fading away, I found it a little bit of a bummer. But back to Goombella's theme, it's really good. As far as I can tell, it's wholly original, not based on any existing song or something of the like. The relaxed beat and wholesome, cozy melody feel perfectly befitting of Goombella, one of, if not, the best character in the game. Instrumentation-wise, it's a little generic, but that's completely fitting for a character that's a literal Goomba. Like, generic. What? The melody isn't particularly remarkable, but this line played here by the mallets is amazing. I love that the bass disappears and the percussion quiets, giving us a lovely little melody against some pleasant piano chords. Then things build up, everything coming back for a nice little climax. Every instrument gets some time in this song. The bass gets a nice run, then the strings, then a lovely little flute solo. If one word summed it all up, it'd be friendly. A tier. So actually, there's some variance on the Rogueport theme, depending on where the player is in town. For the shops, there's this really nice subdued version that comes in, one that's a lot calmer than the flamboyant and attention-grabbing main theme of the seedy town. It's basically just a cover of the Rogueport theme, with an acoustic guitar playing a nice arpeggiated line underneath a series of pleasant little flutes, mallets, oboes, and strings. I really like this version, possibly even more than the original. It gives a nice dynamic nature to the town, how everything quiets once you're in a shop. And yes, this version still has a little bit of the Thousand Year Door motif in it. B tier. On top of the shop variant, there's also a version that plays in Podley's Place, the bar, soda shop, located in Rogueport's main square. And honestly, this music is perfect tavern fare. Makes me feel like I'm about to go on a massive quest. The 6/8 time signature is a massive departure from the original version of the Rogueport theme, which is this very basic 4/4 time signature. This helps gives the version a completely unique identity. Very adventure-y, instruments featured here, accordion, flute, the works. It also sounds quite hectic, perfectly befitting a crowded bar in the middle of a suspicious town. The scale has also changed, opting for a minor variant compared to the original, which, well, it starts in a major key, but it jumps around a lot, still. Podley's Place gets an A tier from me. There's a third version of the Rogueport theme, but it doesn't appear until later, so we're going to ignore it for now. Moving on. Frankly's theme sounds like a perfect modern recreation of the original. No loss of any charm the original had. This is an immaculate update. The kazoo used for the main melody is a great choice for the zany Professor Goomba, and it's still very goofy synth heavy. There's a couple of new sections such as this violin solo, this flute solo, but for the most part, very faithful. B tier. Speaking of kazoos, the tutorial battle theme, which plays for way more things than just the tutorial battles, but whatever. Anyways, the new version of the song has blaring kazoo. And I mean blaring. I kinda like it. I'm not really that big a fan of the original, and I think the addition of the kazoos really helps this one in a weird way. And the piano bass line is really nice. There's an extended bit at the end, but it's just this Philip Glassian circular series of notes over and over again. It's fine. C tier. Still better than the original. Alright, another big one. Rogueport Sewers. The original has this great repeated synth arpeggio that sounds like that one Owl City song about the bugs. The new version actually has some vertical remixing to it. New elements of the song getting added as you delve deeper into the depths of the underground. The original level closest to the surface is very faithful to the original. It's got the Firefly-like arpeggios, it's got the killer drum beat. The biggest addition to this version is some sitar near the beginning to play the melody alongside the synth. And it's fine, I guess. I don't think it was really necessary. Still, the live instruments and quality sound mixing do make this feel a little more definitive than the original version. There's a new section near the end that, honestly, I wouldn't have been able to tell was new if I didn't listen to the old version. It fits right in with the rest of the piece. The version for one level down adds some subtle mallet instruments underneath the melody during the main section, which you can hear here. There's a little more pad throughout, some faint voices shining through, and the new section adds something beneath the repeated note synth, some nice chords. Sublevel 3 plays as you approach the Thousand-Year Door itself, powerful string chords shining through, letting you know you're getting close to whatever it is you're looking for. The violins are mysterious and foreboding, giving us a little Thousand-Year Door main theme. Strong voices come in, this version of the song sounding truly astonishing. See, this is the kind of thing that would have worked better with Rogueport. Instead of just sounding epic right off the bat, it really builds to it in a great way. Anyways, Rogueport Sewers sounds incredible now, even better than the original. A tier. Battle time! So, the Thousand-Year Door remake has unique battle themes depending on the area, but they're all based roughly off of the original battle theme from Thousand-Year Door Classic. Some take more liberties than others, but we'll get there eventually. I know I said this wasn't a ranking, but I'm going to rank these because I feel like it. Also, I'm doing a tier list for some reason, so I guess I'm ranking them, it doesn't matter. To start us off, we have the battle theme for the prologue in Chapter 1 of the remake, and this theme is the most faithful to the original. Since there's not that much that sets Chapter 1 apart, the area being rather generic, this song just sounds like a souped-up version of the classic battle theme. For future reference, this song consists of 3 main sections. The A section is heavily based off of the Super Mario Bros. Theme A section, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, the iconic first 3 notes leading into an original melody. Then the B section is a play off of the B section of the Super Mario Bros. Theme, only more dissonant with its chromatic descending melody. And finally, the last section is based on the C section of the Super Mario Bros. Theme. While the original version of this battle theme is very electronic, almost every instrument being a funky synth, with some artificial strings coming in to assist from time to time, the Chapter 1 battle theme from the remake is completely orchestral. The futuristic synths replaced with horn, a salsa-like piano part, and strings. But besides these instrumental changes, and some new flourishes, this one is faithful to the original. No major changes to the melody, or the tempo, or the scale. Interestingly, this song contains two go-throughs of the original, with the second changing up the instrumentation slightly. There's also a new section after the second loop, because this game loves new sections. Just a pretty subdued marimba and saxophone played atop some stinging chords. There's also the thinking variant, but you already know how I feel about those, we're not going to talk about them. Electronic identity is lost a little bit, but the energetic horns and fiery piano make up for it. A tier. Another new song plays as Mario talks to the black chest throughout the game. Normally during these chats, the game's music stays exactly the same. Now we get this questy music, sounding like something out of a Zelda game. It would fit in Link Between Worlds. The Dorian mode used throughout helps with this mystical, fantastical sounding piece. This is perfectly fitting for the background music that plays as some mysterious individual promises you great power if you manage to free them for their box. I really like this flute melody here, and the intense build-up at the end sounds nice too. It's not the most memorable piece in the world, but it's appreciated. B tier. I feel like I put almost everything into A or B tier so far. I don't even know why I'm doing this. Uh-oh, looks like someone's gonna get a curse! The music that plays when the box curses you is very faithful to the original. We got some great metal instruments, the guitar wailing in the lower register as the violin screeches, letting the player know they're in for a horrible curse. There's a bit of new content at the end, this toy piano doing a little creepy melody over the wailing strings, the guitar is doing a little reprise of the harsh chords from the beginning. It's a great update of the original, but still not the most interesting song in the world. C tier. C, mixing it up. The deepest section of the Rogueport sewers, not including the Palace or the Pit, hosts the Thousand-Year Door, another progressively intensity increasing piece. It's a slow song, with these intense long chords ringing out. They're similar to the chords in the original, but the timbre on them is slightly different, I feel. Still manages to capture the feeling of the original, against mostly just an updated version of it, without any major changes, save for a new series of chords near the end of the song that I actually never heard in my original playthrough, because I never stuck around here long enough to get there. But they do sound really nice and ethereal. And of course, it ends with a little Thousand-Year Door motif as a treat. But that's just the first version of the song. The bell chords, the short synth that climb up and down, and a couple of other little synths used for flourishes and small bits. However, after each chapter is completed and a crystal star is returned to the altar, new segments are added, as if the door is sentient, as if it knows when you brought another star for it, the anticipation climbing. After chapter 1, a piano section is introduced throughout, playing a series of mystic light runs of notes and chords to accompany the original. These piano chords sound great, especially in the new section added specifically for the remake, arpeggiated chords climbing high into the heavens. After chapter 2, these low droning guttural noises play underneath everything, almost sounding like ominous growls from the depths, a warning, if you will. After chapter 3, these swelling strings join in. Actually, they may be horns. Either way, these low chords start quiet, and then steadily grow until they burst, demanding the listener's attention. With chapter 4, more notes are added on top of these chords, the woodwind notes rupturing with flavor as they build to their loudest point. The new section gets a new flute part as well, the dulcet tones of the woodwind taking over the entire piece near the end, even getting to play the Thousand-Year Door motif. The section that was once mostly quiet now gets an almost sad flute melody to go along with it. The instruments keep building, and after chapter 5, the violins join the chords amalgamated from different sections of the orchestra. The violin's a cocky bastard and takes over the melody line of the new section, reaching for the heavens as the chords rise. A mysterious melody rings out near the end, the violins adding to the cautionary tale already being told by the flute. After chapter 6, a voice joins the fray, occasionally getting a harmony via another voice. These two voices add a lot of character, giving the main section of the song a melody line that it was almost missing up until this point. usurping the violin once the new section rolls around, each instrument outperforming the last. There's something very sad about the voices, and as rewarding as it is to fill out the magical map, it truly does feel almost like a requiem, like there's the smallest bit in the back of your head that knows what you're doing is wrong. This is the most this version of the song will ever build up to though, because after Chapter 7, there's a new song entirely. So I think this is where we'll stop talking about this one for now. As it is, the theme for the Thousand Year Door itself is beautifully done. Its ethereal qualities developing as Mario gets closer and closer to opening the door. I'm a really big fan of what they did to this one. In the original, this was kind of a forgettable song altogether, and now it's a sign of the progress you've gained, both encouraging the player and almost warning them what's to come. S tier. Oh my god, we haven't even gotten to Chapter 1 yet. But before we jump in that pipe to Petalburg, let's talk about one more song you can experience before beginning the journey for real. An original song that plays in battles against the Battlemaster, a new NPC who lets you practice the ins and outs of battling. We also have our first instance of, is this song a reference to modern Paper Mario? Saw on Twitter a decent amount of people saying this song is a reference to Autumn Mountain Battle from Origami King, or is just a straight up remix of the Autumn Mountain Battle theme. And to that I say, no, not really. They sound a little similar, but that's only because they both borrow from the same genre of Chinese music. The erhu, the pentatonic scale, the note patterns, they're both going for the same style and trying to use the same tropes without actually being that similar beyond that. This song gets 1 Shine Sprite out of 3. Honestly, should probably be 0, but I'll be generous. Oh yeah, the song itself. It's honestly awesome. Feels perfect for someone called the Battlemaster, expertly invoking the feeling of dojos and the like. A worthy addition that I didn't spend that much in-game time listening to, because I'm a pro gamer who doesn't need any help. B tier. Okay, now we can move on to Chapter 1. Petal Meadows is a theme that plays for most of the Chapter 1 area, namely the path up to Koopa Village and the path between Koopa Village— that's not right, that's Koopa Village, that's a long ways away! The path up to Petalburg and the path between Petalburg and Schwank Fortress. Similar to the game's battle theme, it's a bit of a spoof of the original Super Mario Bros. Theme, at least a little bit. I feel like I've heard this song so many times just from replaying the trailer over and over again. But yes, this was the first taste of the new OST that we ever got for the Thousand Year Door remake, and it's really good. I was never that big of a Petal Meadows fan, and this song doesn't do that much to change that opinion, but the new section we get of it at the end sounds really great, and is probably the only change worth pointing out, as the instrumentation for this one isn't that interesting. This section that's normally the last part of the original plays out similarly, but on the last go of this repeated melody line, an upper harmony joins in, signaling that we're switching it up. And honestly, the next section feels like it fits right in with the original, the strings playing some really nice phrases before leading back to a nice, tame version of the song's opening, the percussion slowing, the strings accompanying, and then back to the loop. This is definitely a song where the live piano and strings work, trumping the original for sure. But honestly, this song has never been my favorite. It's not that interesting, but I do appreciate the effort made by the new composition team to try and breathe some new life into it. A tier. A version of the song with some bangin' drums also exists, called Searching Petal Meadows. It's almost exactly the same and not really worth mentioning. The music that plays when Mario encounters Hooktail for the first time is a pretty fun, menacing sting, followed by a couple droning notes and intense timpani. Super similar to the original, except the new version's definitely a little more in your face. It plays for like 2 seconds, it's not really worth delving that deeply into. It's fine, C tier. Alright, Petalburg from Pokemon... Oops, sorry, I forgot what video I was doing for a second. I'm not actually doing a Pokemon Town ranking video. Yet. Wink, wink. Okay, sorry, Petalburg, the game's second town. Petalburg is a charming, serene song fitting of a quaint town in the middle of a meadow. The original has a series of quirky synths, a bass, some chords, and a lead. There's this decently repetitive chord progression that repeats throughout, but it goes along with all of the song's main beats so well that it doesn't really tire. The remake replaces most of the instruments from the original, 2 flutes taking the harmony and melody, an English horn or bassoon, or maybe even a bass clarinet, handles the bass, and a synth similar to the original takes the chords. The orchestration stays largely the same, a lot of the same parts, but the first section has an added harmony, as well as some faint acoustic guitar backings. In the second section, the strings come in and play the melody. The strings take over for a while, the oboe playing a beautiful counter melody underneath. Then, when the original would go into the section with some chromatic chords, the remake has an entirely new section, giving the various woodwinds and strings chances to play a couple of short, quick melodic phrases. It's a really nice suite of calming, tranquil instruments, which works extremely well for Petalburg's setting. A tier. Another new song. When Mario's talking to the mayor of Petalburg, this quirky little number plays, one that honestly sounds extremely modern Paper Mario, if that makes sense. I think it's the repetitive bass clarinet and the suite of other woodwind instruments that come to play a goofy series of parts on top of it. I'm gonna be real, this one's just fine. It's pretty unmemorable, just some forced quirkiness that doesn't really manage to sound great. D tier. Welcome to the 65th annual Super Fun Quirk Quiz. Nothing too crazy going on in this one. It's mostly just a repeated C7 suspended 4 chord with a nice and funky bass line underneath. The remake gives us some jazzy horns instead of scratchy synth, which we've seen time and time again for this remake, but at least it sounds more befitting of a quiz show now. Although these chords do get a bit more rhythmically interesting as the piece goes on, which is pretty neat. Overall though, this song isn't meant to be anything that great, it's mostly just a bit piece to act as a mood dissonance compared to the ominous atmosphere that precedes it. C tier. Similarly, the song that plays when Mario's asked a question during the quiz isn't supposed to be anything that remarkable. It's a pretty short loop with some chromatically rising notes against a stressful series of droning repeated tones. The remake similarly subs out the original synth with horns and other live instruments, making the whole thing sound a lot more like quiz show music than the original, the cheesy brass instruments sounding right out of The Price is Right, or something similar. But yeah, short loop, not much worth mentioning. I want to move on because listening to this on loop is extremely stressful. C tier. Schwank Fortress is a dank series of sewer-like areas filled with disgusting, pest-like creatures who feast on your health. Honestly, I think the remake does a great job of capturing the sound and atmosphere of the original. The clanging synths set aside a series of unsure and mysterious leads. One of the biggest differences is the register of the clanging background noises. They're a lot bassier in the remake than in the original, better hammering home the dank, creepy series of tunnels that Mario's currently traversing through. The flute-like synth that plays the original melody is replaced with raspy steel drum notes being hammered out, the toy piano playing a chromatically lowering series of uneasy arpeggiated chords. The song is extended past where the original ends, the same pattern in the bass repeated with a spooky E-piano chord, followed by a little more ambling on the part of the steel drums. There is also this chord with a really slow attack that kinda sneaks up on you. Of course, everything I just described was only the first version of the song, as it progressively builds up as more of this area is completed. The second variant of this song adds a very trap music-like drum kit, making it seem like Skrillex is hiding in the deep dungeon just out of frame. The third variant adds little references to the Super Mario Bros. Underground theme, which is a really clever touch for this subterranean waterway. It's a really clever addition that adds just a hit more flavor to this piece over the original. B tier. I'm really just making these up as I go. We've reached our next partner theme. Another original song to accompany a partner preparing to join our party. Koops' theme is heavily based on Petalburg's theme, using the same melodic pattern that opens the song. It starts the song as a calm whistle, repeated twice against a simple drum pattern, some woodwind harmony, and has a nice call and response with a nice tranquil synth. However, the song quickly picks up steam, an absolute jammin' piano taking over the melody, with an absolutely great chord progression, leading us into a slightly minor section. The song perfectly plays around with the motif, repeating it constantly, but also consistently doing interesting things with it. Then there's this really nice flute melody. The whole thing is peaceful and tame, but there's also a hidden fire in its belly, perfectly reminiscent of Koops himself, the shy Koopa who deep down wants to make something of himself. The Thousand Year Door motif is also rampant in this one, appearing a number of times throughout. It's extremely fitting for the character, it's got amazing chord progressions, it nicely utilizes and repeats Petalburg's main melody. What a phenomenal character theme. I think I like it slightly more than Goombella's, but both are just amazing, so S tier. Another new song, when Koopiku is trying to convince her boyfriend not to set off on the adventure before mercilessly assaulting him, this piece, appropriately titled Melancholy Koopiku, plays. It's nothing that breathtaking, but it is a nice solemn version of Petalburg's main theme, played primarily by the piano, marimba, and vibraphone. It's just kind of typical sappy music, these ascending arpeggiated chords meant to tug at the heartstrings. It's fine, it suits the mood well enough for the moment, but C tier. A short little piece plays when entering Hooktail's castle. It's a nice little ominous sting of descending notes, followed by a series of ascending harpsichord notes. A fun musical dive that's almost exactly the same in the remake as it is in the original. So it's not really worth putting that much thought into. C tier. Alright, Hooktail's castle. The remade version starts on a very fun and suspenseful dominant violin note, before sliding back up to the tonic. That demented series of intervals, originally played by a harpsichord and some woodwind synths, sounds great with a live harpsichord instead of strings, sounding very 17th century classical, the Baroque instruments invoking the image of a hostile castle perfectly. The next section adds these quiet tremolo string notes, the wavering, shaking quality of them adding to the intensity of the game's first dungeon, the low notes of the melody sounding muddy and overbearing, in a good way. The strings definitely have way more prominence in the remake than they did originally. They're everywhere. I think it's a positive change. A castle area and strings go together hand in hand. In my script, like 3 months ago, I wrote visual gag here. I don't know why this, I thought, in particular prompted a visual gag, but here you go, hand in hand. Anyways, the original doesn't really have a lot of long chord backing, leaving a lot of areas feeling empty. But the strings in the remake do a good job of filling in a lot of that empty space, adding more body to the piece. This notion shines through really obviously in the next section, which sounds kind of bumbling and silly in the original, but a little more intense in the Switch version. Then this slowly descending pattern of notes has this new flute to add a little flavor to the upper register. The next section also has some new string chords, a nice addition, but they also remove this slowly rising wind-sounding noise. Which is kinda missed. It's probably the only thing from the original that I do miss. The shape of the noise contorting as it rises towards the heavens, whatever. I don't care, I don't even care. This is where the original would normally end, but we get a great sounding section of the remake that fits right in with the original. This harpsichord and toy piano joining together to play some arpeggiated chords, the strings quickly coming in to back them. Then everything goes quiet, save for a couple of notes ringing out. The strings and woodwinds come in for a little phrase to lead us back into the loop. All of that would have been fine on its own, but as Mario ascends to the top of Hooktail's castle, the music shifts to accompany his journey. The second story adds in a drum kit, A perfectly simple drum pattern played, but one that's not unwelcome. There's some good tom sections. Part 3 is identical to Part 2 until later in the piece, when violins come in, adding more strings to the party, playing some loud, menacing notes on top of the extremely low melodic phrases. During the original section, they play some great quick chords to help accentuate the beat. Everything comes to a head for Part 4, which, yes, it adds in the weird swishy noise I was missing. This version adds in just a few little flourishes and other small additions, like the aforementioned wind sound. So yeah, Hooktail Castle. It's definitely a glow up from the original. I don't see how one could argue the original is better at all. Live instruments, great use of the harpsichord and strings, fun addition of parts as you proceed further up the castle, really great job making the first dungeon seem intense and epic. And I'm glad they didn't just start with the most intense version from the get-go. Rogue port. A tier. Okay, so our second variant of the Thousand Year Door battle theme appears in this chapter. This is an extra battle theme used for this area of the game, as well as the Pit of 100 Trials. Something we'll see for these remixes is that the A section tends to be very similar to the original, with perhaps a scale change. The B section goes off and does whatever the f it wants to do, and the C section brings it back to the original. So, for example, the original piece is in D major. It starts with a descending first inversion of a D major triad followed by a B, which is a slight contrast to the D major chord in the background, ending up with a D6 chord. This leads into C, with the melody starting a C major scale, going C, D, E, and then up to G, before descending back to D, using the F sharp native to D major rather than the F natural from the C major scale. This essentially repeats D major to C major, which is already an interesting place for a D major chord to go, since C natural isn't actually in the D major scale, which is because, surprise, this piece is actually in a D mixolydian mode, which means the typical major seventh is actually a minor seventh. The main motif repeats a third time against D, but for the subsequent C chord, we get a descending first inversion C major triad, which leads us into E minor, the minor second chord of a piece based in D. We get this sort of E minor triad that builds on itself, starting with G, then going up to B, with the E and G backing it to give us an E minor chord. And then this really nice quick progression that brings us from the E minor to an A major, the dominant 5 of the D major scale, usually used for bringing us back to the tonic, or 1 chord. I hope I didn't get too technical there, or too convoluted. I just wanted to talk about this melodic phrase in detail, because we hear so many variants of it down the line. I also hope I didn't say anything that was like super wrong that'll get people with doctorates in music mad at me. But you never know. I'm not very smart. Anyways, back to the extra battle theme from the remake. The first thing you'll notice is that instead of D major, we're starting off in D flat minor, a half step down from the original. Instead of starting on a first inversion of a D major triad, we begin on a second inversion of a D flat minor triad. An interesting change not only from major to minor or from D to D flat, but also from a first inversion chord to a second. I know that may not sound that interesting, but instead of starting on the tonic, or the first note of the scale, like the original does with D, we start on the median, the third note of the scale, and we don't actually hit the star of the show, the D flat, until the second note. Okay, maybe that's not interesting. I think it is. What might be more interesting is that the chord progression of the original version is pretty basic here. 4 beats of D major, 4 beats of C major, 4 beats of D major, 4 beats of C major, 4 beats of D major, 4 beats of C major, 6 beats of E minor, and then 2 beats of A major. Kind of a generic, not horrible, but not super exciting chord progression. In this version of the song, however, the chords are changing way more regularly, starting with D flat minor for 2 beats, then E flat diminished for 2 beats, then D major for 2 beats, then A major, the dominant chord. And that's just the first 2 measures. It's a very step-based chord progression, going from the 1 to a whole step up to a half step down. The melody follows a very similar pattern to the original, starting with a descending second inversion D flat triad, before going back to the tonic. Then, instead of the rising C major scale, which was a 7th in the original key, we get a rising D major scale in this version. Well, it's completely out of the ordinary for a D-flat minor song, a minor second up from the tonic. Instead of the part leading back to the D from the original, we lead back to the median, the E. I have written so much, and I haven't talked about anything past the first two measures of this fucking song. Anyways, so measure 3. Unlike the original, the chord progression doesn't start with the 1 chord, but rather a diminished B-flat chord, the 6th tone of the scale, which does have 2 notes in common with the 1 chord, being the D-flat and the F. This leads to an A major chord, the 6th chord. There's also an A-flat 5 hidden in there, but who cares? From what I can tell, that goes from E major, the 3rd chord, into the dominant again, the A-flat major. In the time that the original went from D major to C major to D major to C major, this version goes from D-flat minor to E-flat diminished to D-flat major to A-flat major to D-flat diminished to B-flat diminished, to A-flat to A major, to E major to A-flat major. A lot of movement there for sure. For the section that's originally a descending first inversion D major chord followed by a descending first inversion C major chord, we instead have a descending second inversion D-flat minor chord followed by a descending second inversion of a D major chord. This relationship between D-flat minor and D major seems to have replaced the original's D major and C major, the odd chord being a half step up rather than the original's full step down. The part that's normally a bunch of E minor parts now starts off in D-flat minor, the 4th tone of the scale, the chord slowly descending downwards in the background. For the end of this section, which normally is just E minor, the 2nd degree, leading into A major, the 5th degree, we go D major triad, E diminished triad, A-flat major first inverted triad, finally ending on the dominant in the same fashion that the original does. Okay. That is it for the detailed analysis. I don't know why I felt the need to go that in depth. I'm so sorry. I guess that I really wanted to dive into how they managed to shake up the original while keeping it similar, but that was a lot and it got kind of technical, and for that I'm really sorry. I may do it again with the next variant, we'll just have to see. I can say off script, I do. And for the variants after that as well, so that's gonna be fun. We're gonna love that. Anyways, the long and the short of it is that while the first one is fun and major, this is a crude minor version, with spooky organs, electric guitar, and violin. See, how hard would that have been to say? Okay. The second section of this actually borrows a melodic idea from Hooktail's Castle theme, which is really cool. These chromatic runs of bells and piano notes in the background, going up and down in an almost dizzy fashion. Then, at the end of this B section, which, like I said earlier, has practically nothing in common with the B section from the original, we get another little instance of the Thousand-Year Door motif. Then, honestly, the C section here is almost more similar to the Super Mario Bros. Theme than the classic variant. The original doesn't really match it rhythmically. Instead of the da-da-da-da, it just does da-da-da. But in this version, it actually does the da-da-da-da, that rhythmic pattern for that part. So yeah. In my script, I wrote da-da-da-da, and it took me so long to decipher what I meant by that months ago when I wrote it, but I think that was it. Okay, the horns do a great job here, they're very intense, and then we get the main section again, with flutes taking the melody for the first half, and the violins cutting back in for the second half. Then for the repeat of the B section, we get those same up and down, dizzy chromatic patterns in the background, the horns playing a regal yet intimidating melody, the violins again taking over for the end, a repeat of the Thousand-Year Door motif. Violins play the C section, and for a little coda at the end, we get this fun bluesy series of piano notes in the bass, quickly joined by an intense mischievous melody. Oh, that sound means it's time for another round of Is This a Reference? I've seen many people on Twitter, again, insist that this part is a reference/remix of the battle theme from Color Splash, a song that also has a section with a similar riff played by the trombone. And the verdict is... what? No, what? The first 4 notes, or 8 I guess, since each note is repeated twice, are the same if the key is transposed by a half step, but it's an extremely common pattern of notes. First tone of the scale, up a minor third, down a half step, down a half step, very common pattern in big band style music. And then that's it. After a single measure, the two pieces diverge, playing two completely different riffs. How are people convinced this is a reference? Maybe if these are like the only two OSTs you have ever listened to? Different instruments, different keys, different after the first few notes, a couple common intervals, and people go wild. Someone even said it references Origami King? What? Where? Okay, Fred, stop getting mad at YouTube comments. It's never worth it. Anyways, this gets a 0 shine sprites on the scale. Extremely slim chance this is a vague nod to Color Splash's battle theme, but I heavily doubt it. Okay, I need to move on. I've talked about it this... Okay, we gotta go. It's good, A tier. Another short, somber piece. This plays during the section where Koops is reading the letter from his dad. It's a pretty short loop since it's only played for one section of dialogue. It's pretty and schmaltzy enough, the serene flutes overtop a soft, emotional series of piano chords and arpeggios. I feel like a lot of feeling is carried through that simple flute melody, almost makes me want to cry. Does Colorado know? Does he know his dad is here? Did Mario, ever tell him? Probably not. B tier. For this quick section where Mario and Co have to escape the collapsing ceiling, a very intense and frantic theme plays. It's really nothing to write home about, it's mostly just a very rhythmic series of dissonant chords against a gurgling bass. It's not for a particularly long section of the game, and after delving far too deep into the extra battle theme, I'm going to keep this one brief. It's fine. C tier. Maybe this is Paper Mario blasphemy, but I've never been the biggest fan of Miss Mouse's theme from the original. Never one of my favorite songs from the OST. I found the main section to just be kind of annoying sounding, and the section with those really quick chords never sounded that great to me either, even though I do like a lot of those zany synths. That being said, the remake makes me like this song. I think it just feels like it has so much more production value, like it feels like real music instead of the musings of a madman. So much is added to this version. A killer drum beat, a funky bass, some persistent synth pads. It just adds so much flavor and character to this song, which, at least to me, used to be a little rough around the edges. This section with the quick and snappy chords sounds a lot better too. I feel like they made some pretty big changes to it. It's more melodically consonant, which still has some squeaky high-pitched synths in the background, very reminiscent of a little mouse. There's also a new section at the end with some quick runs of notes, some really fun synths, and a few thousand-year door motifs mixed in. I really like this version of the song way better than the original, A tier. Both games have a song that plays upon meeting Hooktail, but they honestly couldn't be more different. In the original, it's just more of the droning notes accompanied by timpani that you hear when you first see the dragon fly overhead, but in the remake, it's still got gross and scrungly synths, but an electric guitar and drum kit quickly come in, making Hooktail seem metal as fuck. It's a pretty simple song introducing the battle, but it's cool that they wrote an original for this piece. Still C tier. Alright, our first major boss of the game. I mentioned it in my battle theme ranking, but I was honestly never the biggest fan of Hooktail's theme. I do like the big band drums, and a lot of the synths are fun. I found the melody kind of boring, save for the section at the end with the fast chromatic swingy notes. So how do I feel about the remade version? Meh. I mean, I guess it's better. The drums at least sound as good as ever. The beat is almost palpable. I can feel it in my heart. I don't really know how I feel about the main melody line, now played by the violins and trumpets. It's already not the greatest melody line of all time, but I do think the synths in the original fit it a little better. I feel similarly about the second section. The live instruments don't sound as good as the chiptune style synth that plays that part originally. The final section is replaced with some nice sounding strings, adding a nice contrast to the swingy notes I mentioned earlier. There's a new section at the end here, commanding trumpets playing a short sting as we get a super gurgly and deep bass, a series of violage arpeggios joining in on top. Notes screech out, the tritone dominating, as if to draw attention to how ungodly this whole fight has been. Finally, the violins play the swingy melody near the end of the original again, this time more intense as it leads back into the loop. It's fine. Like I said, I've never been that crazy about this one. I miss some of the synths compared to the live instruments in this one, but the new section at the very least keeps things interesting. Plus, it's just a first boss theme, it doesn't have to be that amazing. C tier. So people were expecting variants on the battle theme going into the game. What we were absolutely not prepared for were variants on the theme called Reunion in the original game. This is another schmaltzy, happy piece that plays for heartfelt moments during the game, such as reunions. These different versions in the remake aren't super unique from each other, usually just a different instrumentation. This version features a recorder as our lead star, playing against a piano, bass, and some flutes. The violin takes the lead for a little bridge, leading right back into the main section, but this time with some nice string accompaniment. A new section consists of some strong chords against a lighter drum pattern, before delving into a nice, swingy, and pleasant melody, one that really does suggest, hey, maybe everything's gonna be okay for us. It suits its place in the game perfectly, and also puts a smile on my face. B tier. The jingle that plays upon getting a crystal star and beating the chapter is filled with triumph and joy, sounding just like an updated version of the original, with no major departures, at least at first. During the repeated section, there's a new chord progression, with another little hidden 1,000-year door motif in it. Even a tiny little song like this got a huge upgrade at the end. They really went all out with this soundtrack, didn't they? What joys will Fred find next in the 1,000-Year Door remake soundtrack? Will the surprises continue for the better? Or will people insisting this game's music is filled with Origami King and Color Splash references bring him to his demise? Find out as the 1,000-Year Door remake review continues. Right now. Cutting to the Peach intermissions, Grotus's room is mostly just a bunch of ambiance. Computery sounds with no real melodic ideas. There's some musical sounding bleeps and bloops, but they're pretty disconnected from each other. The remake employs a lot of new synths from the original, but the original spirit is there. It honestly sounds a lot busier and aggressive than the original. Like, before I was just in the land of computers. Now, the computers have gained sentience and are out for my blood. About 30 seconds in, though, instead of just being mostly ambiance, we do get the makings of an actual song. A heavy beat crashing in against a repeated series of slow, ominous notes. It's cool, but I also feel like it's a hair too intense for just some cutscenes. It's hard for me to hear myself think over all that noise, which I guess means it's accomplishing the goal of being like an evil song. I don't care, I'm gonna go with D tier. When Grotus summons the Three Shadows, the group formerly known as the Shadow Sirens, a new song plays, one capitalizing on the ghostly nature of the three characters. Spooky, shaky strings echo out, high-pitched bells playing gentle and creepy phrases, a theremin wailing in the background, a harpsichord banging down in the lower register. They basically picked every stereotypically spooky instrument they could think of and threw them together in this song, which is pretty funny. And it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. A good way to introduce these characters to players who have no idea who they are, making them seem mysterious and ookum spookum. C tier. Alright, another rare instance where I like the original more than the remix, we have Peach's theme. The theme that plays as Peach wanders the halls of an evil secret base and somehow never gets caught. Where is everyone during these times? On break? Anyways, I think it comes down to the instrumentation here. In the remake, a flute plays the melody for all of these sections, with a bassoon playing the bass, all while the bells from the original play underneath these new instruments. I don't know, there's something about these quaint, not particularly loud bells taking the lead of the song that just sounds so good. The music box quality of the whole thing feeling perfectly fitting of Princess Peach herself. And now, I don't know, the flute and bassoon feel like they were just included because they're usually very Princess Peach core instruments. But in this instance, I just think the bells are better. I don't really know why. This new version does make a pretty interesting use of Peach's castle theme from Mario 64, acting as a nice counter melody while a melody reminiscent of the first half of the song's melody plays. It's a nice theme to go along with Peach's captivity, but yeah, I just like the quaintness of the original slightly more. C tier. Alright, cutting over to the King of the Koopas himself, Bowser. Bowser's castle theme starts with a loud, bombastic fanfare, the airship theme from Super Mario Bros. 3. We get some snare drum befitting of a king, the synths from the original replaced with strings and electric guitar, which sound really good together. The flutes also are a nice touch, sounding very regal. This is a more than fine rendition of Bowser's castle theme, and it's pretty surprising that they didn't think to use any electric guitars in the original rendition of this song, sounding perfect for the Koopa King. The new section also sounds immaculate and menacing. And it's time once again to play Is That a Reference? Many say that this song contains a reference to Bowser's motif from Paper Mario the Origami King. And yeah, it's hard to argue with this one. That is absolutely an intentional musical reference to Origami King. Same motif, almost note for note. It's even used for the exact same character. 3 Shine Sprites. See, I'm not entirely unreasonable. Anyways, B tier. Let's move on. Now that the Peach and Bowser intermissions have been discussed, we're officially done talking about Chapter 1. It only took us... Oh god! Oh god! But we're not out of the woods yet, because as Mario leaves Petal Meadows, he gets an email from the captive Princess Peach, and just like in the original, it's a really neat rendition of Super Mario World's title theme. And just like the original, it stops after that game's A section. What a shame, with all of the extended versions of songs in the remake, I thought there was a chance they'd extend this one too. Guess not. It's admittedly pretty grating, but so is the original, and it's not meant to be listened to for more than a couple seconds at a time anyways. C tier for this one. A new song was added while reading Peach's emails. A mystifying piece with wailing violins that almost sounds like they're crying out against some glockenspiel arpeggios playing an F minor 6th chord, the D natural sounding off-putting next to the F minor triad, adding to the level of uncanniness that dwells within this piece of music. Another relatively short piece that's not worth delving too deeply into, but it suits its purpose well. C tier. Alright, now that Chapter 1 is truly done, let's talk about some songs one might hear out and about Rogueport. When talking to Luigi in the middle of his personal quest to save Princess Eclair, this rather silly piece plays. This wet, echoey instrument playing a repeated pattern against other synths playing little chromatic step-based melodies. The remake overhauls all of those original instruments, a completely different synth playing the bass chords as a flute takes over the main melody. However, after one go-through, the whole thing transforms, a killer drum beat coming and turning the song on its head, in a really positive way, once again transforming an odd, silly little ditty into something that actually sounds like real music. The live instruments suit this one so nicely, I don't miss the original at all. The whole thing perfectly encapsulates the yarn that Luigi is spinning, starting off pretty quaint with just the Luigi-like synth and the flute, before more and more elements introduce themselves into the mix. During the B section, even more elements are introduced, including chanting voices, continually adding to the intensity, before everything comes to a head with a triumphant fanfare, a remix of Super Mario Bros. 3 World Clear theme. The epic instruments getting added in perfectly replicate the embellishing Luigi does as he tells you about his adventure. This is absolutely the definitive version of this song, no question, at least to me. A tier. A couple of short songs play when cooking with Zesty, not worth going too deeply into. It is interesting how there's essentially 6 versions of this song this time around. There's 3 different 10-second variants for when Zest cooks something with 1 ingredient, and 3 longer variants for 2 ingredient recipes. So these 3 different versions all have different endings, depending on the quality of the meal. If you f up and make like tar or something, you get a silly, slightly chromatic ending that really conveys that something went wrong. If the recipe is fine, you get the normal ending of the song, with just a short little cadence. Finally, if the dish is transcendent, there's an extra little bit. Hooray. I like how they streamlined the cooking in the remake so it all moves a little faster. I approve of all of these. They won't be going in the ranking though. They're technically more like jingles, and I haven't really been including jingles. I just wanted to quickly talk about them. The NPC Lumpy. Jesus Christ, could you imagine if your name was Lumpy? His parents must really love him. Okay, anyways, the NPC Lumpy has some new music. At this point of the game, you can talk to this oil baron wannabe and fund his quest to strike it rich in Paper Mario 64 location. Since his plan is to trek off to the desert, we get a very deserty piece because, even in a game without a desert location, Intelligent Systems needs to get at least 1 desert song in. It's mostly just a series of sitar chords with a mellotron flute and some Indian-sounding drums, likely tabla. It's fine, C tier. How does this expedition fare? I suppose we'll have to come back later to check. It better go well. I have 300 coins riding on this thing. Don't you dare f*** up, Lumpy. If one ventures underground to the land of Wonky and pay him some coins, he'll tell you some stuff. But more importantly, he'll allow you to listen to this banger. Another new song featured in the game. It honestly sounds right at home with the rest of the Thousand Year Door soundtrack. It's very electronic with some very odd synths. It almost just feels like an odd synth showcase, just a bunch of weird noises trading off the melody line after every phrase. It's fine. It kinda just sounds like noise, but Monkey really is something, isn't he? He's just a circle. This has to be some of Thousand Year Door's weirdest character design, yeah? I mean, look at him. I had a friend in college who used to have vivid nightmares about Wonky, and I can't say I blame him. Okay, let's move on. Why am I talking about Wonky still? There's technically still a couple songs you could hear in Rogueport at this point of the game, but they become more prevalent in the next chapter, so we're going to follow Punio and hightail it to Chapter 2. Unlike the cheery, lively fields of Petalburg, the boggly woods are mystifying and placid. Long, droning notes accompany the monochromatic colors of the forest. Right off the bat, I don't like the violin in the remake as much as the bells in the original. I do like the wispy, long chords that back it, but I feel like the violin doesn't have the right musical envelope for the scene like the bell-like synth does. And I think that means maybe it's time for another music theory lesson, or acoustic lesson. Okay, so all notes have a musical envelope, which really just describes how the note is changing as time goes on, typically its volume. The envelope consists of 4 parts: the attack, decay, sustain, and release. The attack is the beginning of the note, usually referring to how long it takes for the note to build up to its full volume. A note with a short attack will immediately be at its full volume, and a note with a long attack will take a while to build up. Decay is how long it takes for the note to get from the attack level to the sustain level. It's kinda like a bridge between the two. Sustain is, if the note is pressed or held, how long will it take before it fizzles out? A note with a long sustain can pretty much go forever, but a note with a short sustain can whittle down to nothing pretty quickly. Think a piano. If you press and hold a piano key, the note won't hold forever. Finally, the release refers to how long it takes for the note to fizzle out completely once it has been, well, released. So if you pick up your finger off the piano key, how long does it take for the sound to completely dissipate? All of that to say, in the remake, the violins are sustaining the note for a long time, while in the original, the bell synths rely on the release, the sound slowly dissipating after the note is pressed. And I think this release sounds way better than the sustained violin notes for this section, but maybe that's just me. It probably wasn't worth going too far into detail on musical envelopes just for that point, but now you know if you didn't already. Plus, maybe I'll want to talk to you about them again down the line, and now you have the background knowledge. Lucky you. Disclaimer that after a few measures, the original actually does switch to violin for the melody, but the bell section is still surely missed. Speaking of bells, the remake does still employ a lot of them. Just not for the main melody, they mostly play little ascending phrases underneath it. There's this really pretty flute that comes in at a certain point too, and of course, those bells sneak in a little thousand-year door motif during the song's new section, those crafty devils. The remake's probably better than the original overall, despite my one gripe at the beginning. It's an extremely atmospheric song, and the added flute adds to the wild atmosphere. There's this almost hypnotic nature to this song, as if it's meant to lull one into a deep, deep sleep. The kind of thing you'd hear at some holistic healing center. Embrace your chakra. Oh, B tier. There's a variant of this song called Searching Bogly Woods that has some varying drums. It plays when you're looking for Flurry's necklace down the line. It's basically the same song with some new percussion. Another song I like less than the original, I'm not a fan of the new theme for the Three Shadows. The original opens with this low and scratchy pattern in the bass, and while I don't love it, it's at least quiet. In the remake, it is blaring. It just serves to muddle the entire song. In the original, those high-pitched, evil witch-sounding bells were the star of the intro, but it's hard to hear anything over the attention-demanding harpsichord taking over the song. I wonder if this was some sort of sound mixing error, or if they just really wanted to emphasize this bass part for some reason. Anyways, for the main section after the intro, the remake replaces these synths with a really short decay and sustain, see, it came back, with pizzicato strings, which is a good live instrument equivalent, since they're also super short notes. The original short synths are also still in there as well, they just sound really good together. Then the way too loud bassy harpsichord comes back in. I swear they didn't mix this right. The live oboe does sound really good playing the melody, it manages to sound perfectly befitting of three witches, but damn, is it hard to get over how much they messed up the bass notes of this song. The climax of this piece, however, sounds almost identical to the original, which is nice. I'm glad they used bells that sound super similar to the original for this part, which neatly shifts the time signature to 3/4 for a few measures. It also goes on a little longer than the original, but no part of this extended version is particularly worth going that deeply into. There's some neat additions, and I'm happy with the way they kept it faithful in a few spots, but there's a glaring issue in this piece that just makes me prefer the original. D tier. Oh boy, another variant on the battle theme! Can someone please pull up our reminders on how the first two went? Alright, perfect, thank you. We're jumping up to G-flat minor for Chapter 2's battle theme, opening with the same descending second inverted triad that the extra battle theme began with. Our opening chord progression is G-flat minor for 2 beats, E diminished for 2 beats, G major for 2 beats, B minor for 1 beat, and then D-flat major for 1 beat. All three of these so far have started on the tonic and ended on the dominant. This progression actually has a lot in common with the extra battle theme. Both start with a minor 1 chord, then play a diminished chord, interestingly E-flat diminished in both cases despite them being in completely different keys, Then they both play a chord, a major chord a half step up from the tonic, and both end on the dominant, with the Chapter 2 battle theme having an extra transitional chord in there. The second phrase's chord progression is a little different from the first, going from G flat minor to a G major 7th chord to E flat major to D flat major, which is a really interesting half-steppy chord progression. Sounds perplexing in a way befitting of the forest. Next, we get G flat minor to a G diminished, a nice bluesy contrast, to E minor to D major. The E minor to D major sounds a little strange if I'm being honest. To D minor to C major to B minor to G major. So just a descending series of varying major and minor chords. It's an interesting progression that takes you to places you wouldn't normally expect to go, which I do like. The melody is what you'd expect from one of these. It follows roughly the same pattern as the original, but it's more suited to the song's key. This one sounds a lot like the extra battle theme, similarly to how the chord progression did. In fact, they might be nearly identical, just transposed up a fourth. But that's only for the first two measures, played by a breathy and atmospheric flute. The second half of the A section is taken over by horns, which doesn't really fit the forest's instrumental character, but whatever, it's not that big a deal. The melody these horns play sort of matches the original pattern here, but not really. Instead of a series of inverted triads, it just plays a series of steps, descending down the scale of the current chord in the progression. It does that twice, and then plays a couple of nice flourishes before leading into the B section. Some nice steel strings, taking us briefly into the major key, accompanied by the violins that get louder and softer, breathing as the melody line goes along. The C section is once again played by the trumpets, vaguely mimicking the pattern of the original variant. The second go of the A section is a little different to start, the drums nicely shaking things up as we get a different assortment of instruments, at least until the horns come back in. The flute leads us to the repeat of the B section, eventually accompanied by some electric guitars. The flute keeps the lead during the repeat of the C section, and then the finale at the end starts quiet, thumping drums while the instruments of the forest dance about. Somehow, this piece perfectly screams forest, except for those trumpets, which just feel a little out of place. Either way, a really solid battle theme for Area 2. Still, I'd rank this one at the bottom of the three we've heard so far. B tier for, but why trumpets? You know, as much as I don't like the inclusion of the Think versions of these battle themes, they do make figuring out these chord progressions a lot easier, since they remove the distracting melody line. Still, I just wish they weren't here. I know people like dynamic music, but I feel like dynamic music isn't inherently good on its own. It needs to have a purpose. People just go, wow, it's slightly different. Amazing. Tangent. Let's move on. Some new cutscene music. There's actually a handful of new songs in quick succession. When Pionio is locked out of his car, this delightfully mystifying flute comes in, accompanied by some soft violas. A violin eventually takes over the melody, sharing the spotlight with the flute. This song feels right out of a ballet, perfectly befitting a conversation about the famed actress who lives deep in the woods. On top of that, the instrumentation of flute and strings is perfectly in line with the rest of the music we've heard in the Boggly Woods up until this point. Really nice song you'll hear for like 2 seconds. B tier. Scene fades. Camera opens on a zoomed out shot of Flurry's abode in the middle of the forest's hills. The preceding song is posh, fancy, and perfect for the actress's solo performance. We get a Baroque harpsichord pattern, joined by some waltzy strings and a lovely soprano voice, lamenting the sorrow of a necklace soon to be realized lost. Once again, a very theatrical spectacle for the thunderous thespian Flurry. You think that's her singing? B tier. Now for the complete opposite of my previous Shadow Siren theme assessment, the new battle theme for the Three Shadows is way better than the original. Don't get me wrong, I do like the original and its electronic take on the theme is really nice, but the instruments featured in the remix version of this battle theme blow it out of the fucking water. Instead of the low, menacing synth bell opening, we get this fast-paced accordion. The instrumentation has been changed completely, the aforementioned accordion and strings stealing the show, making the song sound like karaoke night in Halloween Town. Some of the original synths are still lurking underneath, reminding one of the old version while still sounding brand new in an excited, constantly moving way. The new section is also great, opening up with ragtime piano, the key shifting slightly, the whole thing sounding like a menacing vaudeville show. The accordion takes over the melody line, joined soon by the strings, taking everything back into the main melody line of the original before looping again. This is probably the biggest glow up so far. While I'm definitely fond of the original, this version takes everything that worked about it and turns it up to 11. The chromatic melodies and accordion sounding so perfectly befitting for the trio of witches. S tier. Probably my favorite song we've talked about so far. Now we have a rare occurrence. A character that actually did exist in the old version. Originally, this theme played when Flurry decided to show her, gratitude to Mario for finding her necklace. It's a slow, sultry piece, one that almost feels like it needs an age restriction. Like, whoever wrote this thing was feeling a certain way. And the remake makes this worse! The alluring saxophone that starts things off screams romance, and there's like, moaning throughout. Who the f***'s idea was that? The live instruments sound really good here. It's the type of piece that definitely sounds better with an actual band than with synths and electronic instruments. It's considerably extended from the original, which makes sense because now it's Flurry's character theme rather than just some music for a quick cutscene. The saxophone just keeps going as the chord progressions change. As with the other partner themes, this eventually leads us to the Thousand Year Door motif and more grunting and moaning. Yeah, we're moving on. I don't want this to get age restricted. A tier. Okay, the second quote-unquote dungeon theme from the game, the Great Boggly Tree. It honestly gets off to kind of a rough start. The original opens with this almost otherworldly series of bells, ascending up to the heaven like tiny bubbles. They're delicate and calm, and are a really great way to open up the theme of this massive tree. And in the remake, this opening just sounds like way worse. Instead of the soft little bubbles, we get harsh chords, almost muddy in timbre. Anyways, after the slightly blunderous opening, the rest is pretty solid. The Great Tree has never been that standout of a piece. It's almost more atmospheric than anything. The first section after the opening sounds near identical to the original, just with updated instrumentation, which always is a plus, as long as the new instruments sound good. Then there's these broken up chords. Yeah, I do kind of like them in the original a little better. Not that the vibraphone sounds better, it's just a little too intense for what should be really soft sounding chords. Then we get this repetitive section with this repeated pattern by a breathy synth. And that's when the remake diverges from the original. And I really like the new content here. We get this really pretty flute playing this hypnotic pattern over the old synth in the vibraphone. Then the vibraphone sneaks in a little Thousand Year Door motif. I've seen someone refer to this as a flip side from Super Paper Mario reference, but not enough to delve into why that's wrong and stupid. Anyways, after this, we get those broken up chords again. Then the repetitive synth comes back before leading us back to the start. It's pretty good all around, but there's certain elements I don't like. At least the new section's pretty good. C tier. Okay, about a month has passed since I last worked on this script. I just released the new Mario Kart medley, and now it's time to get back to this video. Where was I? Was this script even good? No, I can say now it's not. But, let's move on. Right, let's talk about the Punies theme. This actually first plays when you talk to Punio before the chapter even begins. but it's more relevant in the Great Tree, and there's also a ton of variance in this part of the game, so bear with me here. In the original version of the song, a sitar opens up the piece and is used throughout, quickly joined by what sounds like a shanai, playing the main melody. Interesting that they chose a handful of traditionally Indian instruments for this piece, but anyways, I digress. The melody is upbeat and perky, matching the original, but also managing to sound way less annoying. However, as more and more punies are added to Mario's tree exploration team, percussion is added to the song. A synth plays the melody alongside the shanai until Mario hits full puny power. Then you get this thumping trap beat. I think this is an instance where the dynamic music actually works really well. It's a simple one-to-one comparison. As your army of punies grow, so does the intensity of the song, both elements building up as the adventure continues. Good work. Oh god, I was doing tiers for some reason, wasn't I? B tier. Some more new event music. For the cutscene where the captive Petunie talks about her brother Punio, this somber piece plays. The solo mallets at the beginning, I want to guess kalimba, invoke a certain sadness, yet hopefulness. And then the other instruments remind the mallets that they don't have to be alone. A beautiful clarinet playing a calming melody line, occasionally trading off with the oboe. It's not a particularly long song, but the instrumentation successfully fits the forest backdrop, and the hope-filled melody is almost saying, hey, cheer up, help is coming. B tier. Jumping ahead to the rescue of said sister, as well as a bunch of unimportant no-names, we get another rendition of Reunion from the original game. Unlike some of the future variants of this song, this one isn't too dissimilar from the Chapter 1 version. The bells take over the melody to more fit in with the background music of Boggly Woods and the Great Tree. Then for the B section, 2 flutes come in, once again fitting in with Chapter 2's general music style. The battle theme in particular I feel uses these flutes a lot. There's a couple of fun flourishes, and for the repeat of the A section, the bells come back in, with the flutes playing a really nice counter melody, giving a wild, natural kind of feel to the piece. A really good rendition, I'd wager. A tier. Another massive glow-up. The remake's rendition of the Jabbies battle is so much better than the original, while still capturing the feeling of the classics version. While the original jumps right into the theme with its screechy, dissonant descending phrases, the remake takes its time with a new ominous intro. The low string notes reverberating as the shanai plays a harsh little phrase, a declaration of war. The backing to this piece just feels more intimidating, those low string notes adding so much tension to the battle. The shanai comes back in with some high-pitched wails. This song makes the fight feel successfully intense, and a lot less annoying. Still, it's not particularly memorable. C tier. Lord Crump's theme plays a lot throughout the game, but it plays first when he masterfully tricks you and locks you and the punies in an inescapable cage. Some songs in the remake try to reimagine the original piece in a new light, usually with different sounding instruments and the like. Lord Crump's theme is not one of those, and more than any piece so far sounds like an HD remaster more than anything. Not that that's a bad thing, as the original has so much character that would have been lost if they remade it too heavily. The overdriven electronic instruments, the Pac-Man death sound effect, they're all so important to this piece's identity, and it's great that they carried them over to the remake. The percussion might be a little fancier, but everything else is so similar and on brand for Crump. I feel like there's not a whole lot more to say about it. This is a great example of how not every piece in the remake needs to sound extremely unique from the original counterpart, and sometimes faithfulness can add to it. B tier. Learning a new skill is originally played for all partner introductions, as well as the item upgrades. Since all partner introductions have unique music in the remake, this theme is now only used for the item upgrades. The theme starts pretty faithfully to the original, pizzicato strings standing in for the 8-bit staccato synth used to play the hoppy melody. The B section also has changed a bit. While the original does have a higher up lyrical component to the melody, it's drowned out by this bassy, slightly crunchy synth, making the register of the melody feel pretty low. The remake instead opts for these nice flutes dominating the melody line. The C section is pretty similar to the original, sounding similar to the A section with some minor melody changes. But where the original loops, the remake comes alive. It sounds like we're going back to the B section, but things have changed. For one, the piece does one of my absolute favorite things a song can do, which is repeat a melody line, but over a new chord progression. It's such a great way to make an old melody feel completely recharged, giving new meaning to a familiar sound. Anyways, after 2 measures, the melody line changes regardless, giving us a sort of reverse Thousand Year Door motif. Instead of an ascending perfect 5th, it's a descending perfect 4th, which, it's the same series of notes. The second note is just an octave lower than in the original version of the motif. I'm still gonna count it as a use of the Thousand Year Door motif because I think that's what it was intended to be, but I'll put an asterisk next to it or something. Anyways, this version of the tutorial is absolutely lovely. The final section of the piece plays off of the B section so interestingly that I feel captivated by it, really making this one feel unique. A tier. There's a practice version of this theme that plays when practicing the ability you just unlocked, but like the idle versions of the battle themes, I don't think this was necessary, and the practice version is just a lesser version of the original. Did anyone suspect that the Thousand Year Door remake would have this much new music? I feel like it came as a shock to all of us. Who would have guessed that they'd write a new theme for the Time Bomb segment at the end of Chapter 2? Anyways, this fast-paced, stress-inducing theme is the perfect bomb escape accompaniment. The chord progression is pretty simple, the whole thing mostly following a pretty simple pattern. 3 beats on the tonic, then a beat a half step up. This half-step based chord progression adds a lot of tension and is pretty common for escape sequences. Just look at Super Metroid. There's nothing that ever really stands out about the melody. It's not a piece that's trying to wow you with a beautiful lyrical phrase. It's urging you to just keep moving so you don't wind up in a massive explosion. The piece actually does switch things up around the 1-minute mark, briefly betraying its previously established looping chord progression, injecting a little last-minute character into everything. The newness to this section is almost panic-inducing in its own right, snapping the player out of the lull they might have entered listening to the hypnotic progression of things up until this point. Good escape music, but it's still just C tier. There's also a battle variant of this song that plays if you encounter any enemies on the way back up the tree, but as far as I can tell, it just adds some more intense percussion, so it's not worth going too deeply into. The theme that plays when Lord Crump reveals Magnus von Grapple for the first time isn't a song from the original that I typically think about a lot. Not only does it only play for a short cutscene and a few lines of dialogue, but it's also not very good. Those opening notes are super memorable, but not necessarily in a good way. More in a, ah yes, that's the sound that broke my eardrums kind of way. Then the rest is just, drivel is a strong word, but that's the word that comes to mind. The remake is slightly better. For one, those screeching opening chords have been replaced with very regular string chords. Some personality lost, but it's definitely more ear-pleasing, or at least not ear-shattering. What comes after is still pretty unmemorable, but there's a nice beat to it, and it's tense enough to hype up the fight that follows. I don't really care enough to go that much further detail into this one, but the remake sounds nicer than the original. Still, D tier. Let's get into the fight. Now, if anyone here has watched my Paper Mario Battle theme ranking, they'd know I wasn't super fond of this song in the original Thousand Year Door. I find the instruments used obnoxious, the bass pattern is boring, and the melody isn't anything to write home about. All in all, while it has a fun march-like quality to it, it's just nothing that special as far as I'm concerned. Now, how do I feel about the remakes version? Full upgrade. It manages to keep what worked about the original and buff the whole thing up at the same time. The original is definitely reminiscent of a march, but they fully lean into that in the remake. A droning bass pattern, a steady tempo, it sounds perfect for the militaristic X-Naut henchmen. You also have to appreciate the live instruments in this version. They go a long way to make this piece more palatable. The Thousand Year Door remake is definitely a lot less synth-heavy in comparison to the original game, and in some cases it's a disappointing decision, but I think it was necessary for this one. The trumpet breathes so much life into this piece that was absent in the original. But there's still a lot of mechanical ambience in it too, just to remind you that you're fighting against a man in a mech suit. Where the original normally ends, there's this exciting buildup of notes, this step-based swirl of strings, slowly ascending and ascending before cutting out, an electric beat taking over the song, the percussion changing up like the climax of a trap piece. After this dramatic shift, the percussion returns to its faithful march, a synth playing a great new melody, honestly better than anything from the original version of this piece. It's an exciting, climactic moment, something the original was sorely missing. It's the theme of the X-Naut identity, a triumphant militaristic jingle perfectly suited for the army of weird little alien guys. The energy is, dare I say, immaculate. Vibes are completely different from the original, and yes, I'll say it, I now like Magnus von Grappel's theme. This version, at least. A tier. Well, that wraps up Chapter 2. Well, Mario's segment, at least. When we cut back to Peach, she's a dance instructor now, teaching a robot how to waltz. Typical Mario stuff. In the original, this isn't that memorable of a piece, just a generic little waltz for a quick Peach minigame, and pa bass and chords with a high-pitched synth playing over top. The remake opts for a more classical approach, a string section playing delicately and professionally, making you feel like you're present at a fancy gala in Peach's castle gardens. What's extra interesting about this version is that the worse you do at the minigame, the worse the music gets. Another bit of dynamic music that really pays off. Now, you think there might be two versions of the song, one for when you're doing well and one for when you're doing poorly. Or maybe 3, 4 at most. There's 6 different versions of this song depending on your performance. 6! Regular, bad, really bad, awful, terrible, and the worst. I just find it so funny that there's only one for when you're doing well, and then 5 that are just there to insult the player more and more. Bad versions sound similar to the original, the instruments are just a little off-key. Someone forgot to tune their violin today, David! The constant pitch shifts get more and more noticeable and unpleasant as you descend down the shitty dancing rabbit hole, sounding more and more like a drug trip. Once you reach the terrible level, most of the band has straight up left. It's just you, a couple violinists, a cellist, and some fucker on the woodblock. At the very worst level, the violin and the woodblockist are the only ones who remain. You've disappointed everyone else. These are your only friends left. Funnily enough, they're both playing better than anyone on the higher levels. Either way, this bit is really funny, and I'm glad they included it B tier. Alright, now for the first real Bowser segment. Bowser's theme throughout the game starts with a bombastic rendition of the airship theme from Super Mario Bros. 3, which kind of functions as Bowser's motif in this game. While the original is pretty electronic-y, the remake opens up with blaring guitars, which are pretty fitting for Bowser. I feel like Nintendo usually breaks out the Stratocasters whenever it's time for Bowser to make an appearance. This intense electric guitar segment is immediately juxtaposed with a part of the song that's more representative of Bowser's sillier, goofier nature, chromatic toy piano chords ringing out in the upper register. However, this respite is quickly interrupted by more guitars, balancing Bowser's intimidating nature with his goofiness. Then there's this big arpeggiated diminish chord, taking you back to what you think is the beginning of the piece, only to find out that, shocker, the remake added an extra segment to the end of this one. This extra segment isn't anything too wild, some very Bowsery sounding suspenseful chords leading into a slight key change before returning to the original. A good rendition. B tier. Super Koopa Bros. World 1 plays for the first Super Koopa Bros. Segment, a short platformer level where you play as Bowser. Like the original, it's an intimidating version of the Super Mario Bros. 1-1 theme, and it's another remake song that's extremely faithful to the original. No new segment, no major departures. The synth instruments aren't one-to-one with the original, but they capture the feeling for sure. Not much to say about this one, the original is good, and so is this one, C tier. The Invincibility theme from this section of the game is also very similar to the original, both being remixes of the Invincibility theme from the first Mario game. The instrumentation is slightly different, the remix version is slightly higher pitched, but both songs are short before the loop and feature grating electronic instruments. The clear and lose life jingles from this part are also barely worth mentioning, they're basically the same as the original. Not many changes between remake and original in Super Koopa Bros. Chapter 2 is done! Man, we've talked about a lot of songs. But before we move on to Chapter 3, we have some more Rogueport housekeeping to do. When Mario first speaks to Ishmael in his hideout, this super sketchy piece plays, symbolizing your descent into the underground crime world of Rogueport. The low acoustic guitar chords almost remind me of the Breaking Bad intro, a similar crimey vibe, I suppose. Oddly enough, this song is nothing like the music that plays for Ishmael in the original, although that song is used later in the game. It's not a very long song, but its seedy nature definitely shines through, further illustrating just how organized crime has taken a hold over this port city. C tier. While Ishmael rules over the dilapidated east side of Rogueport, the west side is dominated by the Pianta Syndicate, an obvious mafia stand-in. The theme of the Syndicate is, in a word, sleazy. Intrusive, unpleasant notes ringing out, just to make sure you don't get too comfortable and forget that you're dealing with the mob. The remix version of this song captures the original nicely, really replicating the sordid nature of the Pianta Parlor. The live flutes make a pretty big difference when they come in with their part. They bring a sort of airiness, like a refreshing breeze being blown in from the outside. These flutes are used a lot in Rogueport's music, which is a nice way to tie the Piantas back to the town. A new section adds a little tremolo mandolin melody, which is almost assuredly used to tie in the Piantas back to the mob, as the film The Godfather is notorious for its use of tremolo mandolin throughout its score. Really neat touch. B tier. Intelligent systems with these new songs. Before a minigame in the Pianta Parlor starts, this funky little jam plays. It's a pretty short loop, but it has a great beat instead of synths. There's also a fun little key change in there, but I don't have a lot to say about this one. It's pretty simple, although it does eventually lead us into our next song. The theme that plays during Pianta Parlor minigames is upbeat and spunky, opening with a fun build-up to the Mario theme. A fun, energetic synth and a lively electric guitar pass the main melody back and forth in a way that meshes with the electronic elements of the song very well, with the upbeat rock and roll feel of the rest of it. Very rare for the Thousand Year Door remake, there's no extra bit to this piece, looping exactly where the original loops. Besides the inclusion of the electric guitar, this one is faithful to the original. B tier. Alright, back to the mob story. So Mario does a favor for Don Pianta, finding his daughter, who's currently eloping. When Mario eventually finds them in Rogueport Harbor, a new theme plays, one that's romantic yet somber, opening with sweeping strings and bleeding hearts. As the two begin to explain their need to run away together, a dulcet flute plays a melody meant to move one to tears. It builds and builds, the strings coming in loud for the climax of the piece before everything goes quiet, a lone harp ringing out before the loop. This theme music is perfect. It's way overly schmaltzy, as if to emphasize just how much Francesca and Frankie are laying it on thick in order to get away with their plan. However, whether Mario rats them out or not, they return to the Don's office. If it wasn't clear that the Pianta Syndicate was an explicit Mafia reference, the Tears of a Pianta Boss really hammers it home. Another new piece, this song plays during the heated moment at the center of the Syndicate storyline. Those mandolin tremolos return, this time taking center stage, a clear allusion to The Godfather, along with the menacing strings that accompany. It's not a very long song, but it honestly was such a great inclusion, one of my favorite new event themes in the entire game, just due to how on the nose it is. A tier. Alright, time to take the blip to our next destination, Blitzville. This piece is deceptively long. Usually you'd only hear like the first 30 seconds, but it goes on for a minute and 20 seconds before looping. There's a whole B section in there that most people won't even hear. The original version of this piece uses a handful of synth instruments with long releases, remember ADSR. The notes slowly disappearing into the ether, giving it this almost dreamlike quality. The remix version doesn't really do too much to replicate that, but it still sounds nice regardless. The prominent use of the airy flute invokes the idea of soaring through the sky. In fact, the whole piece is very woodwind-centric. There's a couple of brass instruments and the strings do eventually come in, but those clarinets and flutes do have a field day here. Oh right, and the whole thing is a nod to Mario 3's athletic theme, I guess that's worth mentioning. This version doesn't add anything new from the original, but it is a still pretty fun and different rendition that still manages to capture the feeling of rushing through the clouds. B tier. So the new Blitzville theme shakes things up pretty considerably, as the remake and original take different approaches to musically describe the floating island. The original, with its plucky notes and almost childish instrumentation, seems to score Blitzville as a tourist destination, a place of fun and sightseeing, the background music befitting of a theme park of some sort. The remake, on the other hand, leans into the fact that the tourist destination in question is a martial arts arena. And it sounds really different too. From the sweeping Erhu intro to the shamisen playing those main ascending broken chords. These chords are relegated to the background as opposed to in the original, in which they're pretty prominent. The Erhu comes back in to play the melody, a handful of creative liberties taken with its phrases. I know some people aren't fond of what they've done with it, and I found the change kind of jarring as well, but I actually think it works quite well. The melodies are still very upbeat and theme park-y, but the new instrumentation goes well with the martial arts arena theme and the general architecture of the area. But at the same time, I also get missing the original. The vibes are very different. I like it enough, so I'll say C tier. The Glitzbit theme is also shaken up to better reflect the more traditionally Asian aesthetic of Blitzville, the electric guitar main melody from the original, replaced by a pitch-bending Erhu. I think this change is a lot less shocking than the change to Glitzville proper, as it does a nice job blending the Chinese instrument with the rock and roll feel of the original, a thumping bass playing underneath some overdriven guitar chords, a good mashup to remind you that this is a martial arts arena that's metal as At the point the original repeats, we get some more time with the Erhu, and our first Thousand Year Door motif in a while, subtly snuck into the main melody around the 1 minute 7 second mark. I think this is probably the superior version of the song, managing to sound both traditional and hard at the same time. B tier. there's actually a bit of dynamic music in the Glitz Pit. If Mario enters the door to the arena, this metal, fast-paced version of the Glitz Pit theme plays. It has a 6/8 time signature, and this shift keeps things exciting, giving the song the feeling of a fantastic battle. The overdriven guitars wail alongside triumphant trumpets, which switch off with the violins for the melody line. About halfway through, the whole thing switches up again, screeching notes playing on top of an absolutely metal electric guitar, rhythmically switching off between the lowest of the low register and the highest of the high, the contrast sounding really intense. And for those of you with a keen ear, we have to bring back our "Is this song a reference?" meter. This section of the song has some glaring similarities with the theme of Tape from Origami King, the Shifty Sticker. Now the similarities. Both songs have the same rhythmic low electric guitar, followed by a screeching note a few octaves up. The rhythm of the low electric guitar notes matches pretty identically to the Shifty Sticker. Both parts are in the exact same key, meaning these notes match pretty well. On the "It's Not a Reference" side, the high notes don't match super well. In Shifty Sticker, these notes repeat twice with a very distinct rhythm before returning to the low notes, but in the Glitz Pit Arena, just one screechy note sounds before returning back down. Also, the end of the two phrases are pretty different. The low electric guitar finishes off the phrase in both, but the melodies could be, different from each other, more different from each other. I don't know why I went off script there for a second. Anyways, what's my verdict? It's probably a reference. I'd rate it 2 Shine Sprites. There's a chance the similarities are coincident. It's not the most uncommon guitar pattern out there, but it would be a pretty big coincidence. Oh, and the very end of this segment ends with a series of climbing notes that matches pretty well with another section of the Shifty Sticker. So yeah, probably a reference, but not certainly. The final section of this song also goes pretty hard, with a breathy, warping synth sounding out alongside more electric guitars. Overall, this theme perfectly encapsulates the battle-hardened combatants in the Glitz Pit Arena, duking it out to be champion, the siren's call of glory and fame. B tier. Another piece remade masterfully, Grubba's theme has always had a sort of sleazy manager vibe to it that fits the character perfectly. The remake leans into this and turns that element up to 11. The slow, swingy tempo is the perfect backdrop for some trumpet and New Orleans jazz. For the 100th time, a weird synth is replaced by a live instrument and the trumpet takes over the first phrase of the melody. The orchestration after that remains pretty consistent, a bassy bebop organ playing the next phrase, a higher-pitched organ then plays, then short, trilly trumpet notes pepper the song as a low, gurgly synth plays the melody. It's all pretty much the same as the original up to this point, the instrumentation matching almost entirely, just with an updated library of sounds. After the B section, we do get a new section that places emphasis on the expansive horn section, trumpets and saxophone playing alongside each other, and the jazzy vibes. We also get another Thousand Year Door motif peppered in, played by the slow molasses-like trumpet. This updated version of the song is frankly phenomenal, and is a perfect depiction of Grubba as a character. He's sleazy, he's grubby, as his name implies. And he's gonna lock you into a 30-year contract, son. Perfect work, no notes, S tier. Oh boy, have we arrived at yet another battle theme for me to overanalyze? Guys, recording Fred here, I don't want to read this. I'm looking at maybe a page and a half of single-spaced writing for this one. I don't want to read this. Okay, here we go. Chapter 3's battle theme is rock and roll through and through, which is perfectly fitting of the battle arena, making every fight feel like an intense match for cheering fans. Electric guitars wail in the bass, while an exciting synth and trumpet trade off for the melody in the A section. This instance of the battle theme opens with the same interval as the extra theme in Chapter 2's battle theme, a second inversion minor chord, this time based on A minor, the key of the song. I think it's cool that every battle theme variant thus far has been in its own unique key, not sure if that continues throughout. Our chord progression in this opening bit is A minor for 2 beats, then B flat major for 2 beats, a half step up. These minor battle themes have all utilized this half step up interval in this section, but Chapter 3's battle theme jumps into it immediately as the first progression. Then it's E minor for 2 beats, the dominant minor, then F major for a beat, and G major for a beat, climbing back to the tonic via the major 6th and major 7th chords. Honestly, this chord progression is really satisfying sounding, starting at the tonic, then going up a half step, and giving us something slightly out of the ordinary, before going down to the minor dominant, a kind of somber place before ascending back to the tonic via 2 major chords. After this repeats twice, the second half of the A section is quite a bit different from the others. It follows a similar rhythmic pattern and general pattern of whether the notes are ascending or descending, but besides that, this is breaking new grounds. The trumpet sounds off a triumphant fanfare against shredding guitars, making you kind of feel like a badass in the ring. Our chord progression here, to compare with the original, is F major to D major to C major to G major to D major, where we hang out for a few beats before ending the section with some intense G major chords. All of these chords are pretty tame for A minor, except for the D major, the major 4 giving the whole piece a really victorious vibe. Minor 1 to major 4 just has that great vibe to it, I don't make the rules. The B section takes us into the parallel major of the section, A major. The guitars shred a bit more, both as the melody and down in the bass line. The melody here isn't anything incredible, it's more of a subtle solo than anything, but it's certainly jammin'. The trumpet leads us fearlessly into the C section, another rendition of the Mario theme's C section. For the first time so far, instead of starting on the tonic, we start on C sharp, the major 3 of A major, and we climb up to E before the jump down to A, a sort of an inversion of the original progression, but still outlining the tonic triad. It's a great change of pace, and it sounds good. For the second run, we actually do start on the tonic with a more traditional version of this motif. Also, the C sharp goes down to C, bringing us back to A minor, even if the chord in the background at this point is F major. Then we get this repeated pattern here, the bass ascending and ascending until we're back at the first loop, comfortably at home in A minor. For the second of the A section, the melody and instrumentation stays mostly the same, with a more intense and interesting drum pattern underneath. This is true of the B section as well, until the end, where the guitar's notes get faster and faster, leading us into an amazing version of the C section, the intense synth from the beginning, joining the trumpets in unison, the chords and harmonies all ringing out, screaming with excitement, like the adoring fans watching the match. Things slow down to a simple percussion, the bass line thumping as the guitar and bass simmer in the bass, the organ joining up before the trumpet joins, playing a similar melody to the one featured in the Glitz Pit Arena. This is a nice interlude before the loop, guiding us back to the beginning. Truthfully, this is it. This is when I fell in love with the battle variants. This song is so full of life, so metal in a battle arena kind of way, making every matchup feel like the spectacle it deserves to feel like. From the energetic synth to the brazen guitars, every element pulls its weight here to make something that just sounds flat out awesome. S tier. Easiest S tier so far. This is my favorite song up to this point in the game so far. Once Mario has climbed the ranks of the arena a little bit, there's a kerfuffle at the hot dog stand. While Mario does his best to catch the bouncing Yoshi egg, this silly piece plays. From the high-pitched squeaks that open the piece to the bouncy bass line, the whole song feels farcical. To stick with the remake's dedication to making the music more fitting of a martial arts arena, a little gong hit is added to the beginning of this piece, which is a nice touch. Besides that, the spirit of the original is carried over pretty faithfully, with a slightly more prominent bass drum and some extra little flourishes. Plus a whole new section at the end with more ascending nonsense and silliness, the chords rising as if to signify rising tension. Even if the stakes aren't, like, particularly high, this guy just wants to make egg hot dogs, so. There's also this silly little da-da-da-da-da-da at the very end, very cartoonish and fun. A light-hearted piece for a fun little moment of whimsy. B tier. Speaking of this silly little melody, once the egg hatches and your new Yoshi partner emerges, we get another new partner theme. For the nameless Yoshi, I named mine Goshi, we get an intense, serious version of the egg chase theme. It's just, after hearing the egg chase scene for 20 years, it's so jarring to hear, like, an epic version of it. Not that it's a bad thing at all. This remix only lasts to the very beginning of the song, and the rest is pretty much its own thing, adopting an Asian style of melodic patterns to go along with the martial arts aesthetic of the chapter. A lot of little flourishes and a minor pentatonic scale do a good job of setting this martial arts battlemaster vibe, making the Yoshi kid seem way cooler than he actually is. Besides the traditionally Asian instruments, we also get a funky bass, an organ, and a couple other more modern accompaniments. The melodies sound sharp and exciting, a bunch of short phrases cycling in and out, almost as if they're all battling with each other, fighting for supremacy with their quick jabs, punchy short notes dominating the piece. And of course, around the 1 minute mark, we get a great use of the Thousand-Year Door motif, the first half invoking a minor 1 chord, the second going up to the major 4, a progression that I've described earlier as having a great feeling of hope and triumph. We get another use of the motif around the minute 15-second mark, one with a little more attention drawn to it than the original use a few seconds ago. A piece that brings a great energy, does a phenomenal job of tying the rock and roll fight to the Asian theming of the chapter, and perfectly scores the young Yoshi's eagerness to join the great Gonzalez himself and kick some ass. A tier. Once Mario and Yoshi team up to destroy the Iron Adonis twins, ascending Mario and team up to the major leagues, there's a bit of a vibe shift for this chapter. Actually, if you for whatever reason haven't played the Thousand-Year Door but are still watching this video, I'd recommend putting the video down here until you play the game. This is about as far as one can get into the game before I feel like spoilers start to ruin the experience. So yeah, if you don't know what happens in Chapter 3 of Thousand-Year Door, I really recommend you remain unspoiled on it. With that out of the way, let's continue. After joining the Major League, Mario and Yoshi learn that there's something odd going on in the Glitz Pit. The Crystal Star's location is unknown, fighters start to mysteriously disappear, and Mario starts to receive strange emails from an anonymous source about the Crystal Stars. While the first half of the chapter was all about rock and roll, climbing to the tops of the rank, the second part of the chapter is slightly unsettling. There's something going on under the surface, and Mario's gonna figure out what it is. This tonal shift is represented by a literal tonal shift. The Air Who fight song of the minor leagues is gone, replaced with this slow, enigmatic piece dripping with suspense. The original version of this piece doesn't consist of much, just a low, shady vibraphone, accompanied by a synthy bass, and some ambient percussion, almost sounding reminiscent of strange machinery. But this is really the vibraphone's moment, an instrument used as accompaniment for mysterious moments for decades. This is carried over in the remake, where a slight more in-your-face live vibraphone takes the lead, almost embodying a suspicious character lurking down the poorly lit hallways of the Glitz Pit at night. Unlike the very minimalist version in the original, the remake features a small little saxophone band that comes in and plays at the end of the vibraphone's phrases, almost like backup singers. These breathy, ominous saxophones do a great job of adding to the noir-like mysterious atmosphere going on around Mario and gang at this point of the game, but I almost wonder if they're too pronounced. Like, they certainly take away some of the creepiness present in the original. The use of so few instruments gave this feeling of being alone in an eerie place, with only a little noise accompanying you to make you feel isolated. Still, the saxes do sound nice, so I won't fault their inclusion too hard. But they're a mixed bag in my opinion. As with a lot of songs, this one has a short little news segment added onto the end. It's nothing special, it blends in really well with the rest of the piece, so you probably wouldn't even notice it unless you were really looking out for it. A good rendition, but like I said earlier, mixed feelings. B tier. When Mario gets the aforementioned mysterious emails from the anonymous X, our remix of the Super Mario Bros. 3 Ice World theme plays. A harsh, dissonant piece, complete with screeching high notes and an echoey arpeggiated augmented triad. It's an unsettling chord for sure, and it works so well here, any moment of the game could be suddenly interrupted by this ominous piece. But yeah, the remake's rendition is pretty similar, not really going too in-depth with. Very good. C tier. When something mysterious is going on in the Glitz Pit storyline, a new event theme plays called Backstage Mysteries. The name kind of says it all, honestly. There's not a lot of cohesion to the song, or a particularly strong through-line melody. It's a lot of various mysterious stings, one after another. First the piano comes in, followed by some pizzicato strings, followed by some vibraphone, etc., etc. A lot of diminished and augmented chords here to add an extra layer of spookiness to everything. Really good ambient noise for some of the more tense moments of Chapter 3. But, C tier. Bowser interrupts the fight and suddenly it's a battle with the Koopa King himself. This is a unique battle theme that didn't exist in the original game. In a lot of ways, it's just a more intense version of Bowser's regular theme. It follows extremely closely to that piece, opening with the same rendition of the airship theme, before leading into the same bumbling chord progression, this time with some added percussion and support for the electric guitars. There's also this great chorus that comes in, bringing a new chord progression with it. The next section is also pretty similar to Make Way for Bowser, with a couple changes to make it sound slightly more intense. The tempo is slow for a battle track, but the wailing electric guitars do sound perfectly fitting of Bowser. There's not a whole lot to say about this one. It's cool that they gave this fight a unique theme, even if it's just a remix of Bowser's theme. C tier. Near the end of the chapter, right before the final match with Rockhawk, the champion of the Glitz Pit, Mario gets locked in one of the empty locker rooms in order to keep him from the match. During the sequence and his subsequent escape, we get another new song. This piece's aim is pretty clearly to capture a sense of building tension. Opening with a scratchy bass and repeated synth pattern before the piano kicks in, things slowly build on each other. These uncertain vibes start playing, almost as if they're unsure what emotion they should invoke, as if Mario is still processing the situation he's in. After that, the full-blown panic begins. The guitar plays this 4-note ascending chromatic pattern, the vibraphone slowly crawling upwards and upwards. Uncomfortable chords join in, odd synths ringing out, and, eventually, things reach the peak before resetting, the song looping. This piece does a great job conveying the anxiety of the moment in the game, the tempo and dissonant notes making it almost impossible to sit still while listening. B tier.
I haven't done this before, but editing Fred here, I forgot to mention during this part that there is a very funny YouTube comment thread on this song where someone says, "Has anyone noticed this is an arrangement of the Endless Staircase from Mario 64?" And the response is, it is not in any way that, which is true, it's not. And then the person goes, "I disagree with the strength of your statement, but looking at it again, you're right that arrangement isn't the right word. The part at about 22 seconds starts to introduce a lot of elements reminiscent of the Endless Staircase ascending piano part. To my ear, taken together, they produce an effect that feels similar to a shepherd scale, which the auditory illusion that Endless Staircase uses to sound like the pitch always keeps going forever does not use that effect in this song." Okay, sorry, back to the video. I totally forgot to mention that when writing and recording, and it just popped into my head just now. Nope, no shepherd scale here used. It's just chromatic increase of notes and then reset back to the beginning. Okay, let's go.
It's time to rock. Rockhawk's theme is the perfect background fanfare for a macho bird wrestler in the fight against said champion in the ring. Electric guitars, dominating synths, and powerful chords force the listener to acknowledge just how intense and showy this battle is. Interestingly, there's some decently big musical changes between the remake's version of the song and the original. Let's examine those opening chords that come bursting through after the intro. Well, in the case of the GameCube, they aren't exactly chords, more just intervals. Well, I guess my rock and roll friends would call them power chords. Power chords, of course, being a perfect fifth with octaves. Anyways, with the tonic in the background, we get a series of power chords. However, in the remake, while the top notes of the chords stay the same, that's about it. Power chords no more. Maybe my brain was always filling in the gaps, but despite only really being fifth-based chords in the original, I always felt like the implication of that opening section was to be 2 minor 1 chords and 2 major 4 chords. Like the C in the 3rd chord was a lead-in to the 2nd inversion G major chord. In the remake, however, this progression is interpreted slightly differently, and with the gaps filled in since these are full chords. The first 2 chords are inversions of D minor, and the 3rd chord is a 2nd inversion A flat minor chord, which adds an interesting contrast to the key of D minor. The last chord, though, is decidedly G major, bringing us to the major 4, as implied by the original. I swear, the first time I heard this version of the song, it was incredibly jarring. A flat minor in my Rockhawks theme? Actually, now that I listen further, I think that 2nd chord is actually an F major. Yeah, there's definitely a C in there, not a D. So basically the new version takes the melody line from the original and makes each note the top note of a 1st inversion chord. Interesting. Okay, perhaps a more noticeable change is that in the original, the 2nd phrase is melodically different from the 1st. Instead of D, A, C, B, it's D, A, C, D, ending the phrase on the tonic, which is common, satisfying, etc. In the remake, this 2nd phrase is just a repeat of the original. Are these changes better? Hard to say, but they're definitely different. After the opening section, the next one is pretty similar to the original, with the guitar sounding really great with the updated instrumentation. Then for this section with the descending gurgly synth, the remake makes really cool use of these choruses. I like how this part sounds here a lot better than in the original. It kinda reminds me of Akana Canyon from Majora's Mask. The next section is pretty faithful, with electric guitars building on each other until we get this piece's new section, a little organ ostinato, organically overshadowing ominously. Electric guitars come in, as well as a deep wiggling synth, before things lead into this intense metal section. As with a lot of the songs in this game, this is one of those segments where the modern style of composition shines through. This sounds right out of an Origami King boss battle. Not that that's a bad thing. Anyways, the remake does a really good job of amping up the intensity of this massive arena fight, the electric guitars barely taking a break as the crowd cheers are expertly used as percussion. I do like what they did with this song, but why did they do that to the chords at the beginning? Despite some interesting creative choices, it's pretty good. A tier. Surprise! Rockhawk wasn't the end of this chapter. Hiding in plain sight this whole time was Grubba, the Glitz Pit promoter who's been harvesting power off of the fighters since 1962. Compared to the flashy glamour that normally represents the pit, Grubba is accompanied by dark synth instruments, concocting the image of the arena's dark underbelly. The theme leading up to Grubba's battle has oscillating deep synths and blues scales, at least in the original. The remake seems to go with a more rock and roll theme, with blaring guitars? Isn't that more Rockhawk's thing? I don't know, I like how in the original, it's not particularly rocking, representing a whole new aspect of the Glitz Pit. It's just a little too much. I think it should be more subdued. The pit is empty, there's no one around to be performing this rock ballad for. The main Danganronpa core melody sounds pretty good here, still keeping that distorted Vox feel. The part that plays Grubba's motif though? What the hell was that? I don't know if I love it or I hate it. Did a Pikmin just sing that? The part that follows is a little more in line with the original. Instead of blazing guitars, there's this circular synth in the bass, with the organ playing over top, a spooky theremin coming in to remind you that spooky things are happening here. But then the over-the-top, overdriven guitars come back in, and yeah, they're just not right for this piece. Swing and a miss. C tier. Grubba's battle theme is, similarly to his battle intro theme, shady and menacing, the bass playing a really good hip-hop pattern. Honestly, it sounds like something someone could start breakdancing to. The remake does a better job with making this one sound sinister compared to the pre-battle theme, even if there are times where there's too much electric guitar use. I guess it's nice to have a tie-in to the rest of the Glitz Pit's musical characterization, but I feel like the complete absence of rock and roll in Grubba's original battle theme makes for a sharp contrast that's almost unsettling to hear. Nevertheless, I do like this version in the remake. I think the bass they use captures the same feeling of the original, even if the overdriven guitar that joins in isn't my favorite. I do like the instrument that plays Grubba's leitmotif. It's like a weird, breathy flute with some ominous overtones. The section afterwards is super heavy with the electric guitar, and the high-pitched droning sine wave from the original is removed, which is kind of a shame. Despite the bass in Grubba's theme sounding great, honestly, I far prefer the original. At least up to that point, because the second half, oh man. The back half of Grubba's battle theme shifts completely, everything coming to a grinding halt as the whirring of machinery takes over, and the remake handles this section really well. The atmospheric synths and pads sound bone-chilling, honestly instilling fear deep in my heart. I think it's these guttural choking noises and these chill-inducing high-pitched chords. The bass comes back in and things escalate to the song's new coda, harsh power chords ringing out in the bass as we get this repeated note melody in the upper register, along with this color splash reminiscent synth. This new section isn't bad, but it's not one of my favorite song extensions in the game. It doesn't really add a lot to the experience, nothing particularly memorable. Overall, I think this one is a mixed bag compared to the original. I just think it's a little too metal, and that new section feels kind of unimpactful. However, the updated instruments sound great, such as the bass, and I really like what they did with the creepy ambient section. I'd say, B tier? B tier sounds good. Why am I even doing this? And I mean, why am I doing any of this? A theme for Thousand Year Door's more emotional moments. Sadness and Happiness, renamed a bittersweet music box in the remake, plays once Grubba is defeated, Jolene questioning him about the whereabouts of her missing brother. It's a surprisingly emotional moment, as Grubba lets her know that he's no longer among the living, even though he's reincarnated like 3 seconds later. This is a pretty simple song, a solo played by these high-pitched bells, a melody line and a counter-melody line. In the original, these bells are so pretty, the melancholy melody sounding perfectly played on them. And to be honest, I just don't like this instrument they chose for the remake. This toy piano does not convey the same emotion as the original instrument. It's just way too echoey and detuned, I just can't get into it. Surprisingly, besides that, it's super faithful. As far as I can tell, not a single change from the original in terms of the melody line and its counterpart. Until the first loop though, that is. A long pause, followed by a comforting sound of some low strings, a quartet joining the lonely toy piano, as if to inform the listener that, hey, maybe things aren't all bad. I'm a sucker for this kind of thing, where a simple piece is repeated with a more fleshed out accompaniment, and it sounds really good. I think this was a great choice, really punctuates some of the more emotional story beats well. I may not be a big fan of the toy piano, but it's hard to argue with those strings. So, A tier. I can't help myself, I just love Smile and Tears so much. I mean, Sadness and Happiness. Similar titles. Rip off. And thus ends Chapter 3. Besides some post-chapter cleanup. We're probably 2 hours into this video by now, but we're living large. During the Peach intermission, Tech tasks her with an infiltration mission, to disguise herself as an X-Naut and get some information out of Grotus, the X-Naut leader. During this brief bit of time where Peach is disguised and on her recon mission, this spy-like theme plays, a new piece with a slap bass, some bluesy piano chords, and a mysterious vibraphone, all elements of a great sneaking around theme. It doesn't do a lot before looping, but it does a great job of injecting some character into the sequence, making the player feel like they're engaging in some covert ops, even if they're just walking down the hallway. Thousand Year Door in a nutshell? Anyways, it's fine, C tier. Once Peach encounters Grotus at the end of this section, another new song plays, called Grotus's Ambition. It's not particularly long, but it does have an unsettling atmosphere, complete with echoing low piano notes in a dubstep-like beat. But yeah, not a particularly long loop, nor is it that interesting, but it is a neat new bit of cutscene music. I can't talk about all of these forever. D tier. Alright, finishing up Chapter 3 for real, we have Peace Returns to the Glitz Pit, another new version of Reunion. This version borrows a lot of elements from Chapter 3, especially its battle theme. The low electric guitar is contrasted by the triumphant horns. The slow adagio tempo still grounds this as a Reunion theme, the walking pace and happy-go-lucky melody kind of a funny contrast to the intense synths and metal instruments that play throughout. Also, did they just kind of forget about the traditional Asian instruments that were a crucial part of this chapter's musical identity? Like the erhu was a main instrumental character of this chapter, featured in Glitzville's theme, the Pit's theme, and by the end of the chapter it just kind of vanished, replaced with the rock and roll and synths. I feel like if they wanted to change up Chapter 3's musical theming from the original, with more traditionally Asian instruments and melodic ideas, they should have followed through a bit more near the end of this chapter. Regardless, this is a fun version of Reunion, one that's pretty fitting of a fighting arena. B tier. Of course, as most of you probably know, there's actually another song in Glitzville, but we can't get it yet, so we're gonna have to come back later. Chapter 4. Horror. Darkness. Pigs. Twilight Town is the first area of Chapter 4, a small hamlet on the edge of an eerie forest. There's a certain uncomfortableness to the music in Twilight Town. Drawing, oscillating synth notes echo ominously throughout, high-pitched whistles shifting in and out of attention. The remake has a few changes. This high-pitched flute-like pattern is changed to the bells. The remake really does love its bells. The remake's version of the song is actually really good. They managed to get these really full sounds out of its instrument. These droning bass notes contrast against the melancholy vocals, harmonica, and strings. It sounds so hauntingly beautiful. I think the use of voices here really contributes to this one, the climactic build-up sounding better than ever. This piece's new section near the end also sounds so natural, like it might as well have been there since the beginning. This serene yet spooky waltz-like tune echoes throughout town, making me feel like I'm part of some scary graveyard ball. This piece is excellent, an absolute glow-up from the original that improves on it in almost every way. So many beautiful moving parts collide to make a piece that's ethereal, haunting, and beautiful all at the same time. S tier. Twilight Trail is next. The road through the forest has similar music to Twilight Town, an emphasis on these pulsing, constantly morphing long notes. There's a little less comfort in it than in Twilight Town. There's less of a home-like feeling to it. It just sounds cold and empty, like a musical warning of sorts to stay away. The remake does a decent job with this one as well. The echoing mallets contrast with the harsh, dissonant strings and create something extremely unwelcoming. The strings actually might be too intense. Like, I think there's a bit more subtlety in the original, in a way that the remake sort of misses. The new section here isn't particularly memorable, although we do get a really sneaky Thousand Year Door motif right before the loop. I almost missed this one before moving on to the next piece. Yeah, I like the droning notes, the intense strings, and the climbing harp arpeggios, but this version's just a little too in your face. C tier. Alright, another new battle theme variant to look into. And Chapter 4's is a banger. So let's begin the over-analysis. Interestingly enough, this is the first of the battle themes that doesn't open with a descending triad. The notes are still descending, but instead of a chord, we get E flat, D, and C, the first part of the C minor scale, our key for this variant. Our fourth note of the pattern is B, leaving us on a suspenseful tone, the harmonic seventh. Usually the third to fourth note of this melody is ascending, but in this instance it's descending in a minor second. This difference feels small, but I feel like this almost contributes to this part of the song not feeling as closely linked to the original as some of the others. That and the absence of a descending broken triad. Like, this part barely feels like the Thousand Year Door battle theme. After that, we get A, B, C, D, E flat. The A feeling kind of interesting as it takes us out of the C harmonic minor briefly, the note being a raised sixth tone, making the scale a melodic minor scale for a second. Then F, E flat, D, all just step-based patterns in C minor. This is a very step-based version of the Thousand Year Door battle theme, kind of making the whole song feel a bit more cramped than the original, since there's not really as much movement. I think it helps make things feel a bit more uncomfortable, which is fitting for the Spooky Worlds battle theme. Then we get the second phrase, which is mostly the same as the first, but with a different ending, giving us an F sharp into G, the F sharp leading us into the dominant major. After this, we actually do get our descending triad. Like the original, it's a first inversion of the tonics triad, but the fourth note, instead of being the sixth note of the key, is the sharp fourth, the tritone, the ungodly being. The second broken descending chord is the C minor triad in its original position. This section of the melody ends with a build back up to G, ending things on a suspenseful note. So now I know you're asking, that was just the melody, but what about the chord progression? Please tell us about the chord progression. Hey, you don't have to ask me twice. This section's chord progression is interesting. Probably the most interesting so far. The first four chords are C minor, B diminished seventh, D major, and F minor, which... Okay, important pause. Stop the music. This is where I left the script abandoned for like 3 months, maybe 4 months. In the middle of a paragraph, in the middle of a sentence, is where I left the script abandoned for 3 months. I came back to it a lot later, and wow. Why was I talking so much about these battle variants? Does anyone actually want to hear this? Well, in memoriam for past Fred, I'll carry on his wishes and keep going. Okay, anyways, back into the fray. This series of chords is really interesting and jarring. I feel like it's not one you'd see in the wild too often. The next block of chords is C minor, B diminished 7, C minor, and then G major, starting off the same as the previous group of chords, but taking us back to C for a second before giving us that dominant major. A bit of a half cadence, one might say. The chords for the next section are kind of hard to discern. My best guess is something similar to C minor, D major, A diminished, and B major. Then some descending chords that lead us into the B section. And man, Chapter 4's battle theme B section is one of my favorites. The melody is taken over by this overactive toy piano, its bell-like timbre sounding perfect playing the ominous climbs and trills of the melody line, while the violas take on a very supportive counter-melody down below, the two lines working together perfectly on top of the intense bass and drum beat. It's very spooky skeleton core, almost as if the melody line is dancing, swirling around the stage, tripping and falling as this very intense transition into the C section blares out. As always, it's a remix of the C section of the original Super Mario Bros. Theme, and besides the minor key, it's still easily recognizable here. And I love this part here, where the entire song comes to a halt to accentuate this 3-note ascending line, making it feel really special and intense. We then get a repeat of the A section, this very ornamental harpsichord taking over the melody, a very traditional instrument choice for a spooky area. The B section stays mostly the same, but then we get this chilling theremin to take us into the C section, the intensity ramping up before we get the new part. A little more subdued with its creepiness, the toy piano doing these dramatic and eerie climbs for the heavens. When I first listened to it, I wasn't the biggest fan of Chapter 4's battle theme. Like, that step-based descending melody at the beginning didn't do a whole lot for me. But I think the eerie beauty of the second section and the rampant intensity of the third do enough to reel me back in and get me excited. I love in my script how every time I take a break, I would express horror at the fact that I was doing tier entries for these. Alright, I'll read the line as written. Oh god, I was doing tier lists for these for some reason, wasn't I? A tier. Alright, we've braved the way through Twilight Trail and have arrived at the epicenter of spooky vibes, Creepy Steeple. Alright, and Old Man Fred has more complaints about the newfangled music. The original Creepy Steeple opens up with these awful, in a good way, reverberating bells along with a faint fairy-like wind chime. It's mostly just ambiance at the start, with these intense horror stings playing throughout before the strings eventually join in with their dissonant chords amidst the screeching of metal in the background, truly making you feel like you're deep within the spectral realm. And the remake is just, too much. I guess that's always been the biggest complaint with the remake's OST, hasn't it? That vibraphone in the beginning just doesn't seem to understand what made those ethereal bells in the original so great. They were quiet and unobtrusive. That vibraphone comes in and ruins the atmosphere, like a haunted house employee accidentally tripping and knocking over 10 skeletons. At least the high-pitched screechy violin is spooky. This version adds a fun theremin and some deep guttural bass clarinet to the mix, which do add a little flavor. But, yeah, I don't know. I kinda miss when this one was mostly just strings and ookum spookum noises. For this piece's new section, the typically devoid of percussion theme has a bass drum unexpectedly pop in, catching the listener slightly off guard. There's not really much to say about it. The clarinet and theremin just kinda dick around a bit, the woodblock eventually coming in with a slow descending pattern before the loop. I like the way the piece eventually picks up, but I still think the beginning just needed to be a bit more calm and menacing in a more silent way, if that makes sense. C tier. An entirely new piece of music. The Atomic Boo used to have the generic mini-boss theme, but now we get this Paper Mario Color Splash song. Okay, it's an original, but man does it sound right out of the previous era of Paper Mario, almost like this could have been an unused track from Origami King. Probably due to the wacky synths and electric guitar. Speaking of, that electric guitar is what opens this piece, a powerful chord followed by this upward piano part. A harsh, gurgly intro, followed by a wiggly synth playing a pretty odd melody, this octave divided by a dissonant-sounding note in between. God, I'm getting flashbacks. I like some of the interesting synths used here, especially the low, chanting-sounding ones in the bass. At around the 52-second mark, we get the chorus, and honestly, it's pretty bangin' and catchy. Then the electric guitars take over again, joined by some other synths before the loop takes us back. And man, I gotta say, what does this have to do with Atomic Boo? Like, in what way is this song fitting for a giant spooky ghost battle in the middle of a haunted church? I feel like this theme should be for like an angry caterpillar living in the middle of a volcano or something. And it just sounds nothing like the rest of the soundtrack. It really does beg the question if this is somehow an unused track from Color Splash or Origami King. Right down to the melodic structure, the ornamental trills, the instrumentation. In fact, I'll go on the record and say that's my prediction about the origin of this song. Origami King Reject. Anyways, it's jarring, out of place, but it sure is banging. B tier. Alright, back to Thousand Year Door. When you first encounter the mysterious monster of Creepy Steeple, this theme plays, these sharp yet muted notes ringing out through dissonant chords and a constantly droning on bass pattern. That's really all there is to this one, but it manages to do a lot with so little. And the remake manages to keep things pretty faithful, at least at first. Harsh chords ringing out on a very similar instrument to the one in the original, with a little extra percussion and some theremin flourishes. What's really cool about this version is how the chords, while staying persistently faithful to the original, add an extra note on top after enough time has passed, this evolution making things sound even more intense than they did before. Changing things just subtly enough that you might not directly notice, but the change is still felt. Then there's this new section with spanning strings and ominous theremin, the chords changing entirely after a little while. It's so faithful yet explorative at the same time, as if this is just a completely natural extension of the original, as if this was the direction it was always meant to go. And I love when the remake composers managed to create that perfect feeling. The original was memorable but not particularly impressive. The remake manages to be both. B tier. Alright, the mysterious monster has challenged us to a battle. Should be no big deal. Oh what? This is one of the best jams in the entire series? I think I've talked about the original version of this theme enough in the remake, so I won't go too into it. But, just briefly, the piece uses the creepy steeple bell, a sound emblematic of the terror wrought upon the denizens of Twilight Town, so well throughout, in a way that makes the battle feel so significant and important. The organ solo in the middle is overwhelmingly captivating, the subtle chanting of Mario up above is great foreshadowing for the fate of the plumber, and the chromatic melody near the end is absolutely spine-tingling. Okay, let's talk about the remake. First off, they managed to perfectly recreate that intro. Those quiet but quickly crescendoing notes, that unsettling chord fading in and smacking you in the face. We get the creepy steeple bells ringing out as expected, as well as a pretty fitting synth to play the melody. The accompanying chords that join the melody are far lower pitched and less scratchy than the original, and honestly, I think they work even better. Listening to the original and the remake back to back makes you realize just how empty sounding the A section of the original is. Like, in comparison, the remake has such a fuller sound. Maybe it's the drums, maybe it's the funky bass line, but by the time we reach the end of the phrase, I feel like the piece has my full attention. Then that little sting leads us into the organ section, the melody and accompaniment very faithful to the original, sounding as gripping and boppin' as ever. Some light percussion and theremin adding a little character. Then the C section starts, a bell ringing out, a sinister chorus of distorted voices phasing in as the bass panics in the lower register, the melody eventually coming in, played by some very appropriate echoing bells. The drums and electric guitar pick up, a dramatic end to the piece. Or at least that's where the original ends, as we're prepped to continue this party further. This short little calm interlude plays before the intensity returns, this almost baroque fugue sounding phrase ringing out of the organ, occasionally switching out with the synth in terms of who gets to play the melody line. This continues for a while before things start to build, the main motif of the piece returning as it leads into an amazing finale, an intense yet familiar way to finish things up. That main motif of the song played against an entirely different set of descending chords, so nicely and finely tying things back to the beginning in a way that feels conclusive, before actually tying back to the beginning as the piece restarts. It's spooky in that fun way, you know? Like, not actual horror, but spooky scary skeletons horror. Halloween antics kind of fun. And I absolutely love it for that. S tier. And with that, another chapter down. Man, this was exhausting. I'm gonna make this a two-parter because I don't think I could do the whole game in one video. It's gotten way too long already. So with chapter 4 done... What? Fake ending? What do you mean? We're not done here? Fine, alright, I guess we'll continue. So yeah, that wasn't really the end of the chapter. Now Mario's a purple guy. When walking around as
Purple guy.
the music becomes sparse. Mostly just ambient noise, empty. As if Mario's not quite part of this world anymore, only bits and pieces managing to phase in. Listening to this music with headphones on is almost chill-inducing. It just makes me feel like I'm on another plane of existence, so close to the real world but unable to fully grasp it. It's kind of sad, really. You think Mario feels sad during this part? I bet he does. But that sparse, sad music can only last so long, baby, because we have a new partner joining our ranks. Vivian, former Shadow Siren and current trans icon, is choosing to team up with the mysterious Shadow that helped her out. And goddamn, this is probably the best partner theme so far. It's that spooky fun genre of music that I'm arbitrarily deciding to call Halloween pop. That beat thumping along beneath a layer of theremins, bells, and strings. Things dance around for a bit before leading into the main section. a fun and more welcoming version of the Shadow Sirens battle theme, which perfectly fits the idea of one of the baddies going rogue and joining your team. This phrase ends with another use of the Thousand Year Door motif before the next section, a beautiful collaboration of scaling strings and dulcet flutes enchanting the listener with gorgeous runs, symbolic of Vivian's sweetness amidst the horror of her past and the fact that she's like a ghost. Then another great melodic section, it just never ends. So many memorable melodies lodged within this simple character introduction piece. The intricate nature of this piece is especially reassuring after the void of music that comes with being a shadow monster, the emptiness replaced with an absolute upbeat banger. S tier, one of my favorite pieces in the entire game. Upon meeting the imposter Mario for the second time, we hear the monsters theme again, this time ramped up to 11. Electric guitars blaring as if Tony Hawk's about to come shredding through. But yeah, otherwise it's pretty similar to the original, just with an intense and extremely dangerous sounding extra layer of shredding metal. Okay, someone in the comments on this one says the Shadow Queen theme snuck in there is insane, but I don't know if I hear that. Maybe it's just been a hot minute since I've heard that theme, but nope, as far as I can tell, that's just nonsense. Moving on, B tier. Alright, one more battle with Imposter Mario, now revealed to us to be named Dupless. This version of the battle theme is pretty similar to the other, but with some interesting instrumental changes that keep things feeling fresh for the refight. Right off the bat, instead of that smooth string crescendo that opens the piece, we get something shakier and ominous, the violins playing a spine-chilling tremolo that just makes things feel so much more broken and wrong. The A section remains mostly unchanged, a couple extra really subtle flourishes that don't change much. For the B section, instead of the organ, the harpsichord gets to play the intense run of notes, which is a nice change, both piano-like instruments sounding right at home in a spooky piece. Following this, the violins sound off, sounding so unwelcoming, as if their cries are unwary ghosts, adding a lot of character in comparison to the original. Then things continue like the original for a while, things getting intense before leading us into the new section, things staying mostly the same, but with a new layer of eerie violins holding over our heads. The harpsichord again replaces the organ, sounding at home amidst the Baroque melodies. For the finale, the strings take center stage, screeching out a beautiful set of high, somber notes that do a good job of accompanying this intense yet captivating conclusion. So yeah, things are mostly the same in this version of the piece as they are in the original fight, but the subtle changes, the harpsichord, the unsettling strings, they all do a great job of making things feel noticeably unique for the ultimate fight atop Creepy Steeple. Very nicely done. S tier again. And with that, Chapter 4 is one for real, and we're halfway through the game. As you may have noticed, there's not a lot of time left in this video, and that's because, if you've noticed, this video is pretty long. Like, a lot longer than an OST analysis should probably be. And yet, we're only halfway done. So we're gonna take a pause. I want to get some other content out, so we'll pick up again soon. But in the meantime, wow, what an OST, huh? Obviously there are some parts of it that I don't like. Not every song needs to be as epic as the composers seem to think they do. Sometimes the original captures the spirit of a specific moment better than the remake could ever hope to. But, God, if it isn't fun to listen to. There's something so magical about a game you love getting a remake like this, and getting an opportunity to hear every song you grew up with expanded in new and interesting ways. I love it. Shout out to my amazing Patreon members for your continued support. I know a handful of them were very eager for me to return to this video and finish it up, so here you go. If you'd like to join my Patreon and get access to exclusive videos, such as this ranking of every Mario Party board theme, check the link in the description of this video. With all of that said, I'm Fred the Monty Mole, and I feel like people on YouTube and other places are way too eager to say something is a reference to another song without any, like, evidence besides that it sounds vaguely similar to it. Music only has, like, so many tones, you know? It's gonna happen that some songs sound similar to other songs. It's life. That's life. That's music, it's physics, it's science.